Hello there, hello friends. It's the Dragon Lore Iceberg. House of the Dragon is coming in just about a week, or exactly a week, I guess. A week and a couple hours change. And so here we are. Figured I'd give you all a little treat. This'll be both a gift, a love gift to my Song of Ice and Fire fans before we go in the House of the Dragon tunnel. But it also is applicable to House of the Dragon, which is about dragons, of course. Yeah, you know, House Targaryen and all that, Valyria. And I've done a history of Valyria. I've done, you know, a Daenerys Iceberg. So what we're going to do today with the Dragon Lore Theory Iceberg is we're going to center this on the dragons, you know, in particular. So we are going to go through Valyrian history, but we're going to think about, really good, like I said, going to center the dragons in the conversation and think about Valyria as a phenomenon of people responding to the power of dragons. And we'll talk about that as well with the, I'll get some Great Empire of the Dawn in there. We're not going to start, I've started so many live streams with the Great Empire of the Dawn just because it's background for other stuff. We will get into that, but we're going to start with Valyria and some of the stuff that is more accessible to the story, that is more, what level is dragon sex? Thank you, Cookie Chris. I appreciate you starting off with the squisher message. So guys, if you want to ask questions at any point during the stream, feel free to do so. Oh, some of y'all got your squisher pins. That's cool. Yep, they're very fun to wear. Wear mine. Got a comment just the other day. If you want to comment or ask questions on the screen, you can send in a question via the PayPal link below in the description, or you can use the super chat function. I may file away your question if I have a section coming up on it for later, or I may address it then, but feel free to ask whatever, whenever. And I'll even try to throw in a couple polls if I can see a good spot for debating a hot topic as we go. So I've got my notes on the bottom. I've got the pictures above. It's a little different than how I did the icebergs before, but this is going to allow me to flip around through the pictures a bit. So, yeah. These are my Reading Rhaegar 70s reading shades. That's what these are. 1976 disco issue. Disco stew. All right. And again, thank you for, you know, supporting my channel in any fashion. Commenting, liking, subscribing. On screens, chat is stuck already. We can fix that. Boom. Thank you for letting me know. So let's dive in. Valyria, and let me just adjust my monitor real quick. Sorry, but pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Grunting. I've been wearing my Kraken pin as a nose ring. That's hardcore, dude. The squishers will definitely not mess with you now. So yes, Valyria. Let us begin with Ted Nasmith's classic image of Valyria, which I have chopped in half. This is the lower half. There's the upper half. Lower half has a little more going on. But yes, guys, Valyria, and let me make this one bigger too, so we can see these notes a little better. Maybe even one more. I'll go up to 125 here. There we go. That's nice and big. And how big is the chat? We can go one more. There you go. That way it'll be intelligible to the people trying to watch on their phones, maybe even. Yeah, there probably are dragons bigger than the Black Dread in Valyria. Yeah. Yeah. So, they seem to have arisen in the wake of the Long Night. This is Valyria in particular. We are going to talk about some stuff from before Valyria, but that's a little more off the beaten path. Valyria is kind of where it all starts. So, they seem to have arisen in the wake of the Long Night. Both the Maesters and David Lightbringer, YouTube experts such as David Lightbringer, agree that Valyria seems to have arisen after the Long Night. The Maesters are just certain about that. Gis seems to have arisen maybe just before the Long Night or in the wake of the Long Night. They consider themselves to be older than Valyria. So there's not really any conflicting information with that. We'll talk about the Great Empire of the Dawn. Obviously, there are dragon lords before Valyria, but not Valyrians, it would seem. And they must have possessed dragons very early on, from the beginning, because they vanquished Gis in the fifth Giscari War, or whatever it was. Dany recalls her history as it being about 5,000 years ago that they finished off Old Gis. And they did that with their dragons. So they must have possessed dragons from as soon as they became a power. That presumably is how they became a power. Gabe asks, could the fire dragons be a more scientific creation trying to mimic the ice dragon, which would then be a totally magical creature? I never thought about it that way, Gabe. But yes, I suppose, if the fire dragons are engineered, the ice dragon does seem to be, if there is an ice dragon. And of course, the ice dragon in the world of Ice and Fire is described exactly the same way as the ice dragon in the short story Ice Dragon about Adara and all that. So George seems to have one idea about an ice dragon. It does seem to just sort of come out of the north, but that could be a result of the, the creation of the others and Azor Ahai and all that stuff too. So I don't know that those are natural either. They could be, but yes, that's an interesting idea to invert the order of events. Maybe the Valyrians were inspired by legends of ice dragons. Probably not, though. Probably not. So 5,000 years ago, at least, they finished off Old Gis, and Valyria was exploring Sothorios before that. So here is the Valyrian Peninsula, courtesy of Atlas of Ice and Fire, Adam Wordhead. This would be the not destroyed Valyrian Peninsula with their roads intact, stretching all the way. You can really see how far they go, It's there's a northern network and a southern network, but all these cities are connected all the way from Pentos to the cities of the Rhoynar to Sarnath on the Valyrian road. That's kind of crazy. That's a lot of movement that they facilitated. And of course, the Roman roads were a major part of the facilitating of their empire. And we'll get into that in just a second. So we'll talk about dragons, worms, and wyverns. Don't worry. We'll get into that. Which is the name of a book by Septim Barth, of course. So they explored Sothorios concurrent with Old Gis. And they seem to have had dragons at that time. So the dragons, like I said, the Valyrians seem to have had them from the beginning. Now, I do think, and we've talked about Nettles, and here's destroyed Valyria and Sothorios, so you can see how close it is. Gis, Valyria, and Sothorios, like these are all very close to each other. And you can see where New Gis is on the island, whereas Old Gis is on the peninsula. But yeah, like their immediate neighbors are Slaver's Bay, Sothorios, the remaining cities of the Red Waste, Karth, and these other two here. So that's the neighborhood. And we're told that Summer Islander mariners, Valyrian mariners, and Giscari mariners were essentially the first to explore Sothorios. So check out my Sothorios video for more on that. But let's talk about Nettles for a second. And I just did a Nettles video, and I mentioned this. So if you just watched the Nettles video, then I apologize for doing this twice. But I didn't really go into it much in the Nettles video, I guess. So look, the original Valyrians were probably shepherds. It's not a ton of evidence, but it seems convincing. So the Gis, I guess it's an Astapori slaver, insults Dany by talking about how the Valyrians were still effing sheep back when Old Gis was, ancient already or whatever. So that implies an origin of them as shepherds. And of course, the Lazarene, the lamb men, who are very near Valyria, they are shepherds. So if I put the map back up here. Yeah, so you look at these lamb men. They live in these grasslands here, right above Meereen. And so that is, if the Valyrians were shepherds, they could have come from close to this area. Potentially up in the Painted Mountains. But yeah, it sort of fits. And then there's also, it's also as far as mythology goes. Hey, Greyways Tim, I will be looking at you. If you've got anything I'm missing, feel free to pipe in. I'll look for your comments. The Apollo is what I was saying. Rhaegar is, seems very Apollo-like. And so the idea of the Valyrians being shepherds also fits some of that mythology as well. I don't want to get lost with that. But yes, I do think that essentially what Nettles is doing from Fire and Blood, of course, she's the one who tames the mighty sheep stealer, using sheep to befriend the dragon. Now, there is a question which is unresolved, like we can't answer it, of whether or not Nettles has Valyrian blood, or whether or not she just tamed the dragon through sheep. I tend to think that she does have Valyrian blood. We know that not all Valyrians look Valyrian, so you don't have to have a ton of dragon blood necessarily. The Targaryens don't even have as much as they'd want you to think with all the intermarriages. But the point is, she used sheep to befriend the dragon. You use food to tame animals. That's how you do it. Okay, so this is a very conventional thing that she did, but that only gets you close to the dragon. It maybe even gets you on the back of the dragon, but Nettles rode the dragon in battle, which to me implies a classic dragon bond. We're going to talk about the dragon bond more, but it is psychic, and that psychic ability seems to be what enables the control of dragons in battle. Like, they do respond to commands, and yeah, the horns and whips, this and that, but we know a dragon's not a slave, and we know that the dragon rider bond is a partnership, a two-way partnership. And so that means that that psychic link seems to be the main way that an effective dragon and dragon rider combo navigates a war zone. And we saw that with Daemon. He puts his arm up, and then Caraxes puts his wing up and blocks the arrows. Daemon gets hit with the arrow, and Caraxes screams and feels the pain and knows that, like, it's time to book it. It's getting hot. So that psychic link is really important. I'm not sure that you could take a dragon into battle without that. So if Nettles isn't, Valyrian blooded, then she is basically just made friends with the dragon, but then she'd just be hanging on for good measure. I don't think she probably knows Valyrian commands either. And also, Sheep Stealer follows her around after she rides him, which makes it look like a regular dragon bond. Why didn't Sheep Stealer just go back to hunting sheep or whatever? Like, thanks, little girl, for riding me and stuff, but not going to war for you. So I think there is a dragon link, but using the sheep is important whether it is or isn't, because we saw with the other wild dragons and even the castle dragons that have been ridden before, the dragons are choosy. They might not let anyone with silver hair ride them. They might eat you instead. So Nettles using the sheep allows her to approach safely. I don't think that necessarily implies she's not, but it's a good idea is the point. And so when you go back to the first Valyrians, or even if you want to say the Great Empire of the Dawn, whoever the first people were to create the dragon bond, and we're going to talk obviously about theories about how the dragon bond was created, you have to get close to the dragons first to do the sorcery. So the idea that the Valyrians were shepherds makes a lot of sense. It gives them a natural, sheep seem to be amongst the favorite food, very fatty and tasty, a little bit of a hairball, but you burn that, I guess. You burn the sheep, you roast the wool, you're left with the singed lamb, mutton. It's very good if you're a dragon. So it gives the Valyrians a logical way to be able to approach the dragons to do the sorcery necessary to make the dragon bond. And I think George likes to show us, he likes this idea of like lost magics that are being rediscovered on instinct or accident. So Dany waking the dragons sort of intuitively with the help of her dragon dreams after many Targaryens couldn't hatch dragons for years. Like, she's rediscovering lost magic, again, based on instinct and dreams and stuff. I think Nettles could be showing us part of how this is done as well. So I don't want to go over, the chat is stuck. Thanks. I don't know why it keeps happening, but thanks for staying on top of it. I appreciate that. So that's cool. I dig that. Yeah. Then we've got Yeah, I think it's about all I want to say about Nettles. It's just showing us a glimpse of how the first Valyrians may have done it. So, let's talk about these dragon lords. They used unbeatable dragon power to essentially create the world's largest empire. And let me go back to the... No, not that one. This one. Nope. We've got many maps today. So here, this is from Winter is Coming. This is obviously the Lands of Ice and Fire map, but colored in. So the red is Valyria. And the blue is where the Rhoynar essentially were, although they also had... There was overlap between the Rhoynar and Valyria. They both had cities up and down the Rhoynish River for a time that were next to each other. So there's overlap there. And then the Andals would be the green. But this just shows you kind of who taught Dany Valyrian. That would be Viserys, who would have learned as a kid. And also, all the free cities speak a version of Valyrian. So everywhere she was growing up, people would have been speaking different forms of Valyrian. So eventually, all of this got colored in red. Okay, this is all Valyria. But right now, this shows you where the Andals and the Rhoynar were to begin with. The Rhoynar are on the rivers, and the Andals are in the hills and the headlands. And they're, the discovery of metallurgy seems to be floating around here. The Andals claim to have discovered smithing, but of course, Illyrio chortles at that, was like, they learned from the Rhoynar. Well, you could see they're right next to each other. And if you go back far enough, it could be that before the Rhoynar are a cohesive empire, but just more of, a group of tribes and stuff. Same thing with the Andals. Like, you know how civilization is. It starts local and accrues into things like empire. And a lot of times, groups that historians will later look back and say, these were all similar people that shared a common belief set and way of life. Those people may not have considered themselves friends. They may have been warring, rival, competing tribes. We see that often. So when you talk about the first smithing, working of iron that eventually led to steel, it was somewhere in the headlands of the Rhoynish River. So no question, just been watching your videos. Thank you, Chris. You're going to go see George in conversation. Have any questions? So yeah, actually I do, John Buxton. I thought of one. I'm going to read a section later from David J. Peterson. He's the guy that came up with the Valyrian language, does all the translations. He actively works with House of the Dragon to give them bits in Valyrian that they need for the show. He comes up with them or, gives them for them. So he keeps a directory of information online, and he published this really interesting paper about the scrolls that Daemon was reading in Pentos. And these scrolls are about all these weird plants and botany that was going on in Valyria. So we're going to read that. And my question for George would be, is David Peterson making that up? Or is he like consulting with George on the crazy botany of Valyria? And by the time we're done with the stream, you'll have more idea what I'm talking about. But that would be what I would ask him. Just because I'm curious, because if it is from George, then it's some pretty interesting stuff. But we'll read that later. There's a weird tree, there's a magical bush that walks around, and some other stuff. Gets a little kooky, yeah. Well, he's reading everything he can about Valyria, so. I tend to look at the Valyrian lore in House of the Dragon as being canon or canon adjacent, unless it conflicts with something. Because Ryan is working so closely with George, for example, the psychic link is implied in the books. When Dany has sex one time and orgasms, Drogon gives a happy little snort, and he comes to her when she's in danger in the dragon pit. So we can already see there's a little bit of a psychic link there, but it's unquestionably, they show us Daemon lifting his arm so that Caraxes lifts his wing like a mech suit. Okay, so the dragon incubators. We don't see egg incubators. We don't hear about those in the books, but it makes sense. As does the hot goo that the eggs are birthed into. That hot goo obviously incubates the eggs. And so when the Valyrians or the Targaryens pluck the eggs out of the goo, they put them in the dragon warmers. This makes sense. So I tend to think House of the Dragon lore is coming from the George Ryan Brain Trust, which is, like I said, going to be pretty close to the book canon or adjacent. So that is a fun thing about House of the Dragon. I feel like we are learning more. Also, Daemon's song, the lyrics of Daemon's song, which we'll get into about the three heads of the dragon, I think is implying a specific theory about the origins of the dragon bond. Yeah, and guys, just in case you haven't heard, there are fresh rumors of Winds of Winter coming this year. George is going to Worldcon in August, somewhere in Europe. I forget where, maybe Ireland. And he hasn't gone in several years and has said he wasn't going to go until he was finished with Winds. Although he breaks promises all the time, so I don't know how much that means. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, getting my hopes up. But yeah, there is fresh scuttlebutt if you like scuttlebutt. Of course, we will appropriately lose our minds if and when Winds comes out. I mean, not if, but when. Okay, so they've created this giant empire, obviously with the unbeatable power of dragons. I just want to point out that they have a lot of skills for maintaining this empire, which they did for 5,000 years. It wasn't just that they could use dragons to defeat anyone. It had several other advantages, okay? So Dragonstone roads and castles are important because they are able to be built fast with presumably with local materials. Very good, Ian. Yep, there you go. So they can, like I said, the roads are a big part of the Roman Empire. Roads are how you move troops, and roads are how you promote commerce. So rapid troop movement allows you to suppress rebellions and makes everyone know that you can do it, okay? And then, of course, by facilitating commerce, you then start knitting together the conquered lands into a more cohesive empire. And after a while, people don't want to go back to more local regional rule because they can just get on a road and go where they want to and enjoy something that appears more like a modern form of life. And you get used to that. It's very comfortable. It's a little safer sometimes. Except for the, you run afoul of the authorities of the empire. If your ideas are too controversial, if you will. So they use their roads and their ability to make the roads and castles to knit the empire together. That's very Roman of them. Obviously, the dragons facilitate air travel. So like when we put at the map here, you can see there's two sets of roads, right? There's all these roads in the south. Whoops, I'm sliding the wrong layer around. There we go. There's these roads in the south that connect Valyria to Volantis and Voluntheres, Mentares, and then all the way over to Marine. And then there's this whole northern set to connect Sarnath and Sath and Asaria over to Qohor, Norvos, Pentos, and Goyandro. So that's, the dragons are how you get in between there, essentially. And I'm going to talk about using dragons for troop movements. And then also I should point out the river, the Rhoynish River. It's wide and slow. So it's the kind of river you can use for a lot of transport, troops, stone, resources, commerce, all that stuff. Ships are going up and down the Rhoyne all the time. Watch out for Dagger Lake, obviously. So, yeah. And a lot of it would have just been going to Croyane, because Croyane was sort of the hub of the Rhoynish kingdoms. But Qohor as well. And you can get to Qohor through the river. So you see the river takes you to Goyandro, to Nysar. I don't know how close you can get to Norvos, but pretty close. The Targaryens were into bestiality. Well, we're going to talk about that. The murals certainly imply that, Joshua, don't they? Yes. Are there Valyrian god statues in Vaes Dothrak? There would appear there is one, yes. Yeah, we see that. I think we see that. Only one though of a matched pair. Yeah. And they would have gotten those from some of these conquering, some of the survivors on the outskirts of the Valyrian Empire. Or maybe they just rode in and grabbed some statues and fronted like they conquered Valyria when they didn't. In any case, the air travel is important. Glass candles are the biggest thing. Glass candles are... I've got some here. We can light the candles too. We just need to turn the map off. Boom. So I created these in Photoshop. The Citadel has a green one, and that means you could also make them out of the purple dragonglass that they have on Dragonstone, or the red dragonglass. So we could see candles of various colors, but most of them are black. And the point is, whatever color they are, they enable all kinds of cool magic. They are like walkie-talkies, but they can be used for dream implantation as well. So Quaithe with her candle can speak to Dany and hear what Dany says. So one person with a candle can enable a limited amount of two-way communication. Quaithe is, and yeah, shout out to Tim who's doing Uncle Things, #Uncle Things this weekend. Quaithe does seem to be limited because she speaks to Dany in riddles, right? And one presumes that that is because she has limited ability to speak. She kind of has to disappear quickly. It's possible that even her speech is, takes a lot of concentration to project sentences into Dany's head. So she speaks in short lines. She can't just sit there and explain stuff. Now, I have talked about Marwyn the Mage, who has access to candles, and he was on the way to help Dany fight the others and stuff, navigate the apocalypse, that he's probably bringing Dany a candle. And so once Dany has a candle, her and Quaithe will be able to do much better communication. But Marwyn the Mage talks to Sam about this. He's like, yeah, the Valyrians could talk to each other with their candles. They could sit at a candle thousands of miles away and speak to each other. Do you think that would be convenient? So think about running an empire, waging war. You don't need to send birds. So the Valyrians have a limited modern way of communication. So I don't know how many glass candle sorcerers they have, but I'm sure every army would have a couple. So as the armies are moving around, they'd be able to communicate, and they'd be able to see the enemy with their dragons flying around and then tell everyone else where. It's just like, good luck fighting these people. And that's why they maintained an empire for 5,000 years. So I just want to point out, it's dragons, but it's all these other things as well. And let's light the candles, shall we? Poof. Oh, now we can see. So they are, of course, they're using magic from the beginning. Whatever the dragon bond is, we'll talk about the lizard people thing. They're using sorcery from the beginning. Sorcery is one of their key tools in their toolkit. They use it to solve problems. They use it to power their civilization. It's not in case of emergency. It's a main ingredient. And their sorcery is all rooted in blood and fire. And we know that fire itself can be a source of magical power, and so can blood. They seem to have been practicing blood magic, again, probably from the very beginning. They probably learned that from the Ishai who came before them, but we'll talk about that. Now, they do, of course, have a kind of lizard people race supremacy. And this art, by the way, Magali Villeneuve, sorry, on the left. And let's see, who did this Rego? Morgane Lafie did Rego. And real quick, this one is The Gates by Max Reese. So this is like Jorah and Tyrion. It's kind of a show concept art thing, but just a very cool Valyrian ruins. So I grabbed this image. And so, yes, they are race supremacists. They are magically different. They are lizard people, and they can control dragons. Other people can't. This is, again, why I think Nettles has to be Valyrian blooded, because if she's not, the whole thing kind of falls apart. It's like, well, anybody could have bonded with dragons. Only the Valyrians figured it out. No, other people would have figured it out. The Valyrians had a magical ability to do it, and that's why No Rhoynar or anybody else ever did it. Nobody ever stole a dragon. Perhaps only one can speak. One can only speak in riddles through a candle because using it entails hallucinations. Quaid is tripping. Yeah, potentially. I don't know. It seems a little more sober than a fire vision, but it's possible. You're definitely operating on the ethereal plane, so there could be a psychedelic-like state. That's kind of what I'm implying. It's like, yeah, you have to translate your thoughts into a different medium to project them. Maybe it's hard. So they do have a kind of polytheism. They, the gods of old Valyria, they said they named their dragons after their gods. I have always suspected that their gods were their dragons, or that their gods would look like dragons if they had depictions. But there's also an ancestor worship angle because the Valyrian ancestors might be in the dragons. That might be part of the dragon bond. So if they're worshiping the dragons as gods, that could also be a kind of ancestor worship, which fits to me. And then the other thing is that they're tolerant. Unlike Cleo, they're tolerant of other religions. Cleo's not. She doesn't like other religions other than Cleoism. She is. And so the Valyrians allowed other religions to be practiced in their empire. And part of that was their supremacy. Like they just didn't really care what other people did. They considered themselves to be kind of like gods, which also fits with the idea that their ancestor spirits are in the dragons. So they're still worshiping themselves in a way. Yeah, tut. Okay, I'll go get her. Gosh, she's not quitting. I'll be right back. And we're back. And Cleo's happy. Now the world can carry on. And so, besides polytheism, I also want to point out that there are links to R'hllorism. Yes. The R'hllorys obviously also use fire magic. There's a lot of overlap. They also believe in Valyrian prophecy. That'll do it. I mean, they believe in the prophecy, the same prophecies as the Valyrians. And this is the temple. This is the Red Temple in Ashai by Sven Sauer. And so, the prophecy, we're going to talk about the prince that was promised and Azor Ahai and all that stuff. But it goes back to Valyria. I mean, Ashai, rather. But the Valyrians also believe in it. So there's a lot of overlap between those two places. And those are the main two places we find R'hllorysm, in Ashai and in the free cities which were founded by Valyria. And in Volantis, which is the most Valyrian free city, like 70% or more of the slaves worship R'hllor. So I have to think that R'hllorysm probably was the strongest and most common religion in the Valyrian Empire besides the Valyrians' own religion. So I just want to mention that. But we'll talk more about Azor Ahai as we go. Just hitting the basics here. Now, the Valyrian Empire was very advanced. They did have, they weren't just crazy dragon lord slave masters. They certainly were highly cultured. Music and arts. We're going to talk about the botany, like I said. They did all kinds of amazing things. They are kind of like the Romans in that sense. It's just that they're also kind of like the Third Reich. And so a lot of their learning and science involved human experimentation and torture. blood magic. Okay, we know that. That's no secret. But yes, they learned stuff, right? So it's not all this analogous to like, Nazi science or whatever, but like some of it is. The Gagasso stuff certainly is meant to be. So it's a little bit of both of those things. We're going to talk about, in fact, I've got a sentence here you can see at the bottom. Valyria is essentially the Roman Empire plus the Third Reich plus Tolkien's elves combined with the dragons of Morgoth, essentially, divided by Atlantis. That's Valyria, which is parentheses Melnibone, by the way. So I just explained the first two, right? It's kind of like Rome. It's kind of like the Third Reich. Hang on a second. And then as far as the Tolkien aspect, the Valyrians are very reminiscent of the elves, but they are wearing the colors of Sauron and Morgoth. And the dragons, of course, in Tolkien world, those are only the purview of the forces of Morgoth and Sauron. The dragons are evil, if you will. And so some people, and this is not my observation, but many people have pointed out that the Targaryens are kind of like, what if you merged Tolkien's elves and Tolkien's, force, the dark forces, you merge them together, you kind of get the Valyrians. So they're that. But then, of course, they're similar to Atlantis with the downfall and this whole idea of a lost golden age, and then Melnibone, Sauron. And then, of course, Melnibone, if you know about Melnibone, that's actually the most, if you had to pick one precedent for Valyria, it's Melnibone. I'm not an expert on Dragon Riders of Pern. I know that's also an inspiration as well. But Valyria, as far as this empire that's like hubristic and only cares about themselves and their dragon lords, and they have, lots of visions and dreams, that's all Melnibone stuff. So, yeah. And Melnibone also has a dramatic downfall that parallels the Doom, but we'll talk about that when we get to Aenar Targaryen. Sorry, I got a squisher in my throat I'm trying to get rid of. I'll get there. And so the Valyrians founded the 9 free cities. They drove out the Andals and the Rhoynar as they formed their empire. Another cool thing is that they founded... here it is. Got to go down a little bit. Many layers. I have many, many layers today. So here's the Narrow Sea. Driftmark, Dragonstone, and Claw Isle, which you can see in the upper left, all 3 of those here. And this is another Adam Wordhead map, Atlas of Ice and Fire. Very cool website. Check it out. These are founded as Valyrian colonies, trading outposts. Dragonstone, Driftmark, and Claw Isle. You can see that the intention was to trade with Westeros. Okay, these are not random. Tyrosh is also a Valyrian trading outpost at first. And George is cribbing this from the Phoenicians, who would build fortified cities just offshore of lands they wanted to trade with. And so that fits Tyrosh and also Old Town and Starfall. And then they did the same thing here with Claw Isle, Driftmark, and Dragonstone. And this seems to be about when Valyrian steel started flowing into Westeros, about 400 to 600 years ago. And so Dragonstone was established 500 years before present, and about 100 years before the Doom. Driftmark was already established by then. So presumably sometime before then. And those Celtigars, that's why Cracklaw Point, they're all good dragon men. Round Cracklaw Way, because look, Claw Isle is right there. So yeah, those were founded as Valyrian trading outposts, and then the Targaryens moved to Dragonstone. They didn't found it, though. And then, yeah, the free cities, so that would be Volantis, Lys, Tyrosh, Myr, Pentos, Bravos, Lorath. I don't think Qohor is one of the free cities, right? I forget. Not important. Thank you, Luna. Appreciate you. Let me just real quick make sure. I think I might have missed one super chat. Myra the Mage is a Targaryen dragon seed lost in time like Varys? ? I don't think so. The future of the blood is important to him. No, I think he's worried about the end of the world. He's monitoring the stuff again on the wall, and he's concerned about the long night. So yeah, I don't see him as a dragon seed. I neither see clues nor a reason for that. That's what I would say. But let me go back to the regular screen. All right. No, not this one. All chat. So another interesting fact, the Maesters used to visit. And that's presumably where they would have gotten the glass candles that they have at the Citadel. The Valyrian steel rod, ring, and mask that the Archmaester of the Higher Mysteries, which is Marwyn, right now, that's where they wear it. Anybody who studies Higher Mysteries and passes gets a Valyrian steel link on their chain. Maester Luwin of Winterfell has one. And just to answer a mystery in case anyone's wondered about this, to join a Valyrian steel link onto a Maester chain, you don't have to rework the Valyrian steel. You just open up the links next to it and join it that way. So they could have bought those links from Valyria a long time ago, or they could have a cohoric smith lurking around Old Town to rework the chains when they need to. Either one. But yes, we see Valyrian sphinxes in the throne room of King's Landing. So one assumes Aegon maybe brought those from Dragonstone when he built King's Landing. But they've also got the sphinxes at the Citadel. So we don't know if they just made those to look like Valyrian sphinxes or if they are imported from somewhere. I don't think that is said. But yes, this is a little bit of Valyrian style that you can find around Westeros. And this art is by Didier Graffet on the left and Jonathan Burton on the right. So in Old Town, of course, we know they like all sorts of knowledge. The Maesters went to Valyria in order to study, not just to get Valyrian steel, of course. They went there to study. The Valyrian libraries are 5,000 years old. They have records of places like Sarnor that were destroyed. So, yeah, they were... Actually, no, Sarnor was destroyed after. After Valyria. But I digress. Lots of books. And this is the library of the Citadel by Kieran Belshaw. And here's the lower level. There's Sam. This is one of the coolest artworks around. Partially inspired me to do the Old Town Commission. Just because it's like, oh, we've got this awesome library. Got a couple of cool citadels. And we just got Ted Nasmith's High Tower. So now we have this one by Chetan Biswas. Which, in case you missed it, I commissioned it in 3D. So there's the Fewstone Fortress. Yada, yada. We don't need to get lost on the High Tower right now, but there it is. And so, yes, they sent people to Valyria to study and occasionally buy small amounts of Valyrian steel. So let's talk for a second about these Rhoynish wars, because they are gnarly. It tells us a little bit about the nature of dragons. And no, oh, there's Viserys' Toy City. Shout out to the Lego Valyria. More fun than raising a family or running an actual kingdom, I guess. Here we go. So this is Chase Stone, the Rhoynar facing the might of the Freehold. So interesting notes, just real quick. The Rhoynish water wizards, in the first Turtle War, they washed away half of Voluntheres. So water magic definitely exists in Ice and Fire. They flooded a whole city, or half of one, those water wizards. Then later in the Second Spice War, Sarhoy was destroyed by the Valyrians. And so the Rhoynar unified behind Garen the Great.
Now, Garen the Great defeated an army of 100,000 Valyrians and 3 dragons at Volantharies. He flooded the city again, and he shot down 2 out of 3 dragons. He says his archers, but I'm guessing those were actually scorpion bolts and not just conventional archers. Because, of course, the Dornish were the only ones in Westeros to shoot down a dragon, which they did with a scorpion bolt. And the Dornish are part Rhoynish. And so one presumes they had better tactics for fighting the dragons because they had the experience of the Rhoynar to draw from. And so they used those hit and run tactics, and they knew where to shoot and how to shoot and maybe even how to aim and all that stuff. So yeah, they shot down 2 out of 3 dragons. Unfortunately, the Valyrians came back with 300 dragons. And yeah, that was that. Saramel and Croriane were sacked and destroyed. And they melted the river. They boiled the river. The Rhoynish took refuge in the river. There was so much dragon fire that they heated the river itself to boiling. And people burned alive in the river, which is pretty horrific for the Rhoynish who worshipped the river. And that led to Nymeria's exodus. So types of dragons, this is speculative, but people love this, and I think it makes a lot of sense. So let's talk about this. This was supposed to be my dragon sorcery picture. But let me pull up my dragons folder. That was by Paul Ewell. This is by Character Design Studios here. So this is season 6 concept art. Dany taking on one of those scorpions. Said scorpion bolts. So this all comes from one sentence that Jorah says to Dany. He says the Targaryen dragons were trained for war. They were bred for war. That's what he says. Bred for war, and in war they died. Which made me think, if some dragons are bred for war, that implies other dragons are bred for other things. And the first thing I thought of was the road crew dragons. You wouldn't want a violent and aggressive dragon to make a straight road that's hundreds of miles long. All of the dragons that make fused stone have to work with sorcerers, right? The sorcerers are using fire, or they're commanding the dragons to train their fire on the specific part of the rock they want melted. Then once it's heated, the sorcerers have to harden it into shape. And then they move to the next bit. So that's how you'd have to do a road. You'd have to do piece at a time. Melt, shape, move on, melt, shape, move on. On and on and on. So like road crew dragons. Here's what you'd want. Road crew dragons, you'd want their fires to be very hot. So you'd want big dragons because dragon fire gets hotter with age. But you'd want docile dragons. And we even hear that, and this is another clue about this, Melis and Syrax and other dragons, Silverwing and Vermithor, that are kept up in the Red Keep and they have their food brought to them, they grow a little fat and lazy. They're still fearsome when roused, but they grow tamer. And dragons that are used to being around people are more tame around people, just like any other animal. And you can see the dragon keepers, they can put the dragons away with poles and Valyrian commands because they're just used to it. They're trained with food and things like that. So road crew dragons would be different than war dragons. They'd be big with hot fires, but you would breed them to be not aggressive. So then you'd have the battle dragons. They'd be bred for strength and aggression, okay? Racing dragons make a lot of sense. We're told that Melis is fast, really fast, faster than other dragons. And every animal that humans have ever bred, we breed some of them to be as fast as they can be. We breed some of them to be as big and nasty as they can be. And we're going to breed other ones to be as fast as they can be. So let me put Melis up on the screen. I think I have Mellies. Yeah, oh, she's in dragons. I have many dragons. Oh, somehow I didn't get Mellies. Well, I'll get Mellies right now. There's some good Mellies artwork out there. Ah, yes, this is a sick one. So this is by Samuel Quadrado. Sorry if I'm not saying that right. But yeah, there's Mellies. Let me place it. So Mellies is said to be very fast. And this, again, leads you to think, well, of course they would breed dragons for speed. And you would use those to send messages, to be scouts, or just for racing, just for kicks. The Valyrians are haughty and they are, they are hubristic. They're going to definitely have dragon-based recreation. So they're going to race their dragons. And messenger dragons potentially could be different. You might want some messenger dragons that are fast and small for short-run messages and errands. But you might want some that are bred for endurance, which might be bigger. Maybe lean so that they don't have to carry a heavy body. They'd have a leaner body shape and, a bigger wing spread so that they could fly long distances. So those would be endurance dragons. I will get the squisher out of my throat. Just bear with me. I'm probably going to have to praise Garth to get it. But nevertheless, you'd have different kinds of long distance and travel dragons. Here's one I thought of last night. Troop transport dragons. This could make a lot of sense. If you had a big dragon, one that was a little more tame or just in tight control of a dragon lord, couldn't you load about, 20 good men? If you came up with a bigger, look at Vhagar. Vhagar is so huge. Let me pull up Vhagar from the show. I think I've got one. Yeah, here's Lena riding on Vhagar. That's perfect. So you see with the cargo net, Lena's a little speck on the back of this dragon, right? You could definitely fit 20 men if you had a bigger harness or saddle. Think about Dune and all the Fremen riding on the sandworms. And they got their little litter, for the Reverend Mother. You could do stuff like that with dragons. So you'd want a huge dragon like Vhagar, and then you would just train it to be a little more on the docile side. Maybe you wouldn't use it to fight. You'd use it to move things. Just speculating, of course. But yeah, you could have troop transport dragons. You could also have show dragons, ones that are beautiful, like Sunfyre. Where's Sunfyre? Oh, I've got to get rid of these two. So Sunfyre, the most beautiful dragon, quote unquote, to ever live, a beautiful golden dragon. Again, the Valyrians are vain. They're very into their own beauty and godlike nature. They'd probably have show dragons. They'd have competitions. They would try to breed the most beautiful dragon to show the other dragon lords. Okay. And so I started thinking about what kind of a show dragon would you want? Well, you might want them to be small so that you could keep them at your court, like in your throne room, entertain the guests at dinner parties. So you want it to be docile and small, but with the most beautiful scales and maybe the most unusual horn shape and things like that, right? Color combinations. We've just seen, they're all amazing looking, but I think that knowing the Valyrians, they'd breed some to be beautiful and some, again, to breed small and docile so that you could keep them at dinner parties and at events. as opposed to your battle dragons. You could also have, just vamping further, you could have ones that are made for forging Valyrian steel. So the emphasis, those would probably be the same as the road crew dragons. Docile, trained, super hot fire. So that's what I've got for types of dragons. But yeah, it's really fun to think about. Because again, the idea that the Targaryens have dragons bred for war implies that others are bred for other things. And they seem to function a lot like other animals in so many different ways. So yeah, that's that. That's types of dragons for you. And then the other idea is that like the Targaryens only survived with 5 dragons from Valyria. And if all the Targaryen dragons were bred for war, then they only survived with one type of dragon. And there were other lines of dragons that may have gone extinct. And that what Melis is showing us is like the variety in dragons with which you could breed. Like if you had Melis and you mated Melis to the next fastest dragon that you found and kept breeding for speed, eventually you could get back to the racing dragons of old Valyria. So Melis isn't a racing dragon, but she's kind of showing you that some can veer more that way. And we also see that dragons of the same age sometimes are bigger than others. The black dragons are all huge, which makes me think that potentially the black dragons tend to be bigger. So let's talk about the blood of the dragon, and let's show off some other dragon art, actually. Here's some more Aegon and Sunfyre. This is Urtach Altanaz on the left, and on the right is Play Century. These are both more Sunfyre here. Beautiful Sunfyre. Here's Vhagar over Storm's End by Anato Finn Stark, capturing the terror and the size disparity. You don't even see Arrax at first. So that just shows you. We saw that on the show. I don't need to belabor the point. Here's another Urtach Altanaz. This is little Laena. In the books, she's 7. And in the show, she's like 12 or 13. And she claims Vhagar. Giant Vhagar. So, yeah, check out my interview with King Viserys and Vhagar. I did a little spoof of how this scene might have gone. This is some really cool stuff. This is by Hivemind 3D. This is Corexes, obviously. Spicy noodle monster, Corexes. Very worm-like, and we'll talk about worms in a second. Guys, let me take a quick breather, and I'll be right back. I've got 800 people watching. Give me like 30 seconds. Wow. You know how the rest goes. All right, so the blood of the dragon. How it's better. Blood of the dragon. How did it happen? Well, we're not sure. I guess I've got a few more dragons to show you. But we have theories, of course. This is Grey Ghost by Hivemind 3D. And I like this one because it just shows you the idea of, dragons burning ships. Valyrians would have done a lot of that. This is Vermithor, also by Hivemind 3D. And Tessarion, Cobalt Blue Dragon, another one of the most beautiful dragons. In fact, they could say that Sunfyre is the most beautiful, but I'd like to see Tessarion up close. Electric, metallic, cobalt. Anyway, nice artwork here by Hivemind. And this is Balerion in the Dragon Pit. It's very old Balerion. They made the dragon look so old. This is like Nana Vagar old. And of course, yeah, near the end of his life, Balerion, more docile. They brought him, cows to eat. And he was kept in the dragon pit. So maybe older, larger dragons maybe they retire the big battle dragons and turn them into road crew dragons when they're old and tired. I don't know. Not a very nice retirement. Better than fighting, I guess, but, Anyway, this art is by Renee Agner. Pretty cool. And here's a little House of the Dragon. Like this one because it shows off the dragon saddle as well as the armor. All the Targaryens wore armor on the backs of their dragons. And the Valyrians probably wore Valyrian armor, such as what Euron had. The richest ones anyway. And then this is the Battle of the Gullet by Thomas Jedrzejek. So we can see more dragons burning ships here. And I won't talk about that battle. We'll see that in season 3 of House of the Dragon. But yes, people die. So we're going to go to the Blood of the Dragon next. Let me put up my Paul Ewell again. So the Blood of the Dragon and my Lizard Babies artwork too. Where's that one? Well, I'll find it in a second. But the point is they are. Here we go. They are lizard people. And what I mean, that's why the dragon babies are important. The lizard babies that Targaryens occasionally have show us that they have reptilian DNA. So, how are they able to form a psychic bond with the dragons? Well, part of it seems to be that they are part dragon, a little bit. And sometimes the babies come out a little more dragon. So, kind of a cool thing. It just shows you like the hybridization is not totally stable. Probably because it was forced through strange magical means, which we'll speculate about. But the lizard babies are the first clue that they are lizard people. And we see that there's two things. That they do seem to have a little bit of enhanced heat resistance. Although they're not fire immune. George has clarified what Dany did was a miracle. And that's not a standard thing that they could just walk through fire and stuff. However, it makes sense that if they have reptilian DNA, if they have dragon DNA, that they are a little more hot-blooded. And they are emotionally. And so, yeah, it makes sense to me if they are a little bit heat tolerant. They do seem to be in certain circumstances. And that would help you ride a dragon because the dragons are warm. They give off heat. You're going to be around the dragon's fires. So, yeah, I do think they have a little bit of heat resistance. And the immunity that Dany manifested as a miracle, it's still probably not an accident that she's a dragon person who performed that miracle, right? So, the dragon bond, as I said, is psychic. Not only do they have the communication with Daemon lifting his wing and all that, we also know that bonding with a dragon affects the personality of the Dragon Lord. And then some Targaryens, like Aenys, the second Targaryen king, he was, weak and lacking in confidence and just struggling with everything until he bonded with this dragon. And then he became stronger, Quicksilver. And that gave him more confidence and became more king-like, a little bit. And we've seen that with other people too. So the bond, if it's a psychic blonde, psychic blondes, watch out for those. psychic bonds flow both ways, right? So of course, the personality of the dragon is going to shape the person. And then there's also just a plain fact of like, you know, if you have a dragon, you of course are going to feel like a badass. Of course you're going to walk with a swagger. You have a dragon. So people that have a sword walk with a swagger. You know, how much more so with a dragon? So these dragon people, they tend to be a little hot-blooded. Hot-blooded, check it and see. If you've got your foreigner belt, that is. That's a deep cut. All right, so George's thought experiments, where it concerns Viserys and Dany and Daemon. This is something I wanted to talk about because this is how it affects the characters. The Targaryens are interesting because a lot of what George... okay, I'm sorry, I got a troll. Slipped by the mods. But yeah, sorry about that. So, the way that George likes to write fantasy, in my mind, it is a Loverboy song, yeah. Oh, but you have to have the foreigner belt. That's probably why it didn't work. But I think the foreigner belt does work for other things. I don't know. It's Aqua Teen Hunger Force. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It's a cartoon. In any case, George's thought experiments, this is how he writes fantasy, in my opinion. He asks the question, what would it really be like? What would people do? Okay. If Peeper, I got a fever of 103. I'm reading the lyrics. If people had dragons, some of them would do what the Valyrians do, obviously, because certain people are like that. If they have power, they use it to dominate others. They use the shocking power of violence as a way of gaining power. And so you get Valyria. It's a very realistic thought experiment. However, some people would react differently. And so we don't know that much about the Valyrians and how individuals reacted to the whole phenomenon of the Valyrian Empire and dragons and all that. But we get to see this with the Targaryens, and it's really interesting. So King Viserys on the show and other bookish Targaryens, quote unquote, like maybe King Aenys, who's reluctant to use his dragon in war. Some of these people aren't totally comfortable with being a hybrid lizard person and being a god human that considers themselves above other humans and doesn't hesitate to use their dragon to massacre people if they don't obey their wishes and stuff. And I love how they explore this on House of the Dragon, where Viserys is basically, you know, he says, look, the dragons, we don't control them. The idea that we control them is an illusion. And King Viserys, they're basing this on the fact that King Viserys in the books, he only rides Balerion the Black Dread one time, near the end of Balerion's life. And that's it. And then he never tries to ride another dragon. So it's kind of like he did it to prove that he could. And then he was like, all right, I proved it that I could, and now I'm done. It's somebody like Aemond One Eye, he would seek out another dragon. If he had rode Balerion and Balerion died, he would have claimed Vhagar or whoever else, right? Daemon, same thing. If Caraxes had died, he would have claimed another dragon. Viserys didn't. And so on the show, we see this, like, okay, he's got a little bit of the Dragon Dream side of it, but he's just not, it was like, he's just not comfortable. He's not comfortable with it. He knows that their monopoly is based on dragon power, but he himself is not comfortable with it. Whereas Daemon wholly embraces it. And then we see Dany wrestling with both sides of that. She embraces it more than Viserys does, but she's also very concerned about collateral damage and about ruling with consent of the governed, which is good. That's good. We don't want the people who have the most supreme war power in the land to be violent psychopaths. That's not good. So I do think George has a lot of fun with the thought experiment. And House Targaryen basically is a running thought experiment of like, okay, we have this legacy from the Valyrians, which is monstrous. But what's interesting is the Targaryens don't really do most of the bad stuff. It's just the incest. And that's kind of a victimless crime because they're doing it to themselves. I mean, the women involved are victims, to be clear, but it's not the same as conquest where they're conquering other people. That's what I mean to say. They're also not doing blood magic, and they're not doing slavery. Those are the main things. They're not sending people, they're not enslaving the Baratheons or a first man house and making them work their minds on Dragonstone. They don't do that. They don't do blood magic where they're sacrificing people to make Valyrian steel. They don't make new Valyrian steel. They don't have dragonbinder horns, which require blood sacrifice. So it seems like the Targaryens are wrestling with this Valyrian lineage and trying to decide how much of it they can embrace. And the individual Targaryens also have that choice. So I just think that's very interesting. This is Valyria by Tommy Scott, by the way. So let's talk about Array's worms and the Dracomorph theory. This will be fun. Where's Arraya? I know she's in here. Oh, here she is. Okay. I'm not sure why the Valyrian steel's behind it, but... Oh, I just forgot to put another picture behind it. Oh, well. There's Array's worms. And I was looking for a picture of Balerion, because Balerion came back from Valyria with big wounds on his side when Arraya got these worms. And this is Doug Wheatley, the artwork. I'll tell you what, I'll just make it bigger and more horrifying. Boom. There you go. So, Arraya's worms, as everybody no doubt remembers from Fire and Blood, she was a girl who was, I think it was either 9 or 11 or something. She hopped on the back of Balerion the Black Dread when Balerion didn't have a rider. So she may have bonded with Balerion and claimed him, but she didn't know how to control him. And so Balerion flew off and disappeared for a few weeks and then came back. Septon Barth assumes that Balerion flew back to Valyria, which is his place of birth. We also see Drogon do that on the Dothraki Sea. Drogon flies from Meereen back to the Dothraki Sea, where he was born. So this is the speculation of Barth. So if it was in Valyria, it would have been like Sothorios or some other place where you can pick up this nasty parasite that she did. And this parasite, they're worms. They're some kind of wriggling, writhing worms, but they're huge. They're huge. And they're cooking her from the inside. This is another clue about the heat resistance. If the Targaryens have a higher heat resistance, then this is a parasite that has evolved to plague Targaryens and possibly dragons, because the host body that can withstand their heat can incubate them longer. Whereas if it would have been a non-Targaryen with this parasite, they would have died sooner, potentially. But in any case, Septon Barth doesn't know what to do. He sees them writhing under her skin. He throws her in a tub of ice water. And at this point, she's like, kill me, right? Like, put me out of my misery. I mean, it's bad. Puts her in a tub of ice water. It kills the worms, but they break out of her. And she dies too, okay? The thing about the worms is that they have human hands and faces. So it seems that they have combined with her DNA. Either that or the the worm parasites happen to have human-like faces and hands, but that doesn't make sense because if you look at worms, worms have a certain kind of face, which evolution has adapted for wriggling through the dirt or through molten rock. A human face is not it. We have delicate faces that are good for open air, not so good for like digging through the dirt. So the worms have human faces and little hands, apparently. And this leads me to believe, this is dracomorph theory, of course, that they have combined with her DNA and that they are a xenomorph-like creature. And I'm talking about the Alien movies. The thing about the xenomorphs is they combine with the host DNA and they make new hybrid creatures every time. And yes, it's very horrible. And this does seem to be directly inspired by Aliens. And there's a new Aliens movie coming out soon, by the way. And so this is, I believe that this story is not just horrible, but is included to help us figure out how it is that Valyrians mated humans and animals, which is what they were said to do at Gagossos. Now, they are already lizard people at this time because they already control dragons. So Gagossos is not where they created lizard people. However, it happened some point, either in Valyria or in Ashai, which we'll get to. But at some point, the lizard people were created. So how do you do this? And of course, there's also like winged men and lizard men and eyeless cave dwellers and other weird people in the Grey Waste. Shout out Grey Waste Tim. In the Grey Waste and in Sothorios that sound like they could be failed versions of the lizard people experiments. Less stable hybrids that are more lizard-like. Or it could be that lizard people are natural, just like children of the forest or animal hybrids, and that the Valyrians are created from lizard people, and that's how they have the lizard DNA. But let's go with dracomorph theory for a second. The dracomorph theory, and this is my theory that I built on the back of Crowfood's daughter's theory. Okay? So watch her Origin of the Dragon Bond 1 and 2. But the dracomorph, basically, I'm observing the parallels to the xenomorph. And I said, okay, this is how we got reptilian DNA, perhaps, into the human bodies. These worms, these parasitic worms, seemingly have the ability to combine human DNA and reptilian worm DNA. And so if you did multiple generations of these worm parasites, you might start to get different offspring with different results that you could then breed. If you got a worm with hands and faces and you bred that with more people, infected a person with that parasite, maybe it comes out more human-like. You eventually get somewhere. Or you breed that back with worms, something like that. This gives us a way to put DNA of lizards and humans together. And so this may be how it is done. And one thing about Gagossos is that after Valyria crumbles, 77 years later, this horrible plague called the Red Death happens. And this is part of Crowfood's daughter's theory. Once again, that channel is called The Disputed Lands. And mods, as I'm talking about some of these theories, if any of you can grab the videos, either the link to my video or to Crowfood's daughter's videos, and drop them in, that would be cool. So this is how you splice DNA. And so the Red Death, 77 years after the Doom, 90% of people on Gagossos die from the Red Death, bleeding out of every orifice in like 2 or 3 days. Well, what if, like I said, the Red Death was actually just Araya's worms, but less far along? Because those people weren't Valyrians with the high tolerance, the heat tolerance. And so what happened is, you know, before the worms were big enough to be seen wriggling under the skin, they're basically cooking the people and killing the people. And so they're bleeding out and dying before the worms can get that big. Maybe they still crawl out and infect other people. But, not many people survived to tell the story. So that was Crowfoot's daughter's theory, is that the Red Death is what happens with worm parasite to regular people. And that with Araya, it just was able to go further. And they were able to grow big enough to hatch and be these, as almost the size of an arm, huge worms. Really gross. So let's change the picture, I guess. And so there's another part of this has to do with dragons' eggs. Baela Targaryen marries Alan of Hull and has a daughter named Laena, who is named after the original Laena that we all know from the show. That Laena has a dragon's egg placed in her cradle, but out of the dragon's egg hatches a worm. A worm. Not a dragon, but a pale white worm-like thing. And it attacks little Laena. And so Alan Velaryon cuts it to pieces. The Oaken Fist. It takes a chunk out of her arm. And so this is kind of like another little bit of Aliens lore, right? Because in Aliens lore, the facehuggers hatch out of the eggs, and immediately they attack the human victim who's been slimed up to the wall so that they can't defend themselves. So on the screen right now is a picture of Rhaena Targaryen, 2 of them. On the left, it is by Amin, Hazim Amin, and on the right, Joshua Kairos. Rhaena Targaryen is the one who came up with this idea of putting dragon's eggs in the cradles of young Targaryens. And the reason why is obvious. Because we see that Dany has dragon dreams that come from Drogon's egg before it hatches. It's a black dragon just like Drogon, and it appears to Dany before Drogon hatches. So that appears to be Drogon's spirit communicating with her. So if the dragon spirits are in the eggs and can psychically communicate with Targaryens, it makes sense to put eggs in the cradles, because that way the baby and the unborn dragon are forming their bond already. And when it says that dragons placed in the cradles basically always bonded with the people. I think I'm going to switch to standing up for a second. Yeah, that's better. Let me get this higher so that the angle is better. 1 second. I just need a fat book. Oh, I know where I can get a fat book. Here's one. Let's see how much this raises the camera by. Oh yeah, quite a bit. There we go. Awesome. Allows me to move around a little bit more and not fall asleep. Okay. Oh, I got some System of a Down lyrics. That's cool. So Rhaena came up with this idea, and the Targaryens who had eggs placed in their cradle, they always bond with the dragons. Oh, I guess I need to raise my mic too. There we go. How you doing, Cleo? Come here, girl. But this one goes wrong, okay? So with little Laena, the girl that was attacked, what happened was a deformed dragon hatched. It wasn't a regular dragon, it was a worm. So Crowfoot's daughter looked at this and she said, this is evidence that dragons are bred, magically bred, from fireworms and wyverns. Septon Barth suggests the idea, flat out, that that's the case. We're going to talk about this more. But if that's the case, then it's another unstable hybrid thing where sometimes the dragons regress and they show more worm attributes, right? It's very important to tell Cleo that you love her. Okay, the chat loves you, girl, because you're beautiful and fabulous. Yeah. So This seems like a bit from Aliens, because again, in Aliens, they hatch out of the egg and they attack. The facehuggers do, and that's how they mate and reproduce. So it seems like George is breaking apart the steps of it. But if you put it together, okay, imagine that we have the worm hatching out of the egg and biting the child, and separately we have a different Targaryen child, Araya, who now has worms in her that hatch out of her, who have hybridized with her DNA. And that's the entire alien life cycle. A worm-like facehugger thing hatches out of the egg, lays its eggs in the human, which then combines with the human DNA. Then you get the chest burster. And so that's essentially what happened to Araya. We had these worms burst out of her body. So George is playing with all these ideas of the xenomorph, and then he's giving us these worms. So I think there's two questions here, okay? How were dragons created, and how did dragon or lizard reptile DNA get inside humans? Dracomorph explains how reptile DNA got in humans, and that's with these worms. But the other question is how, like I said, how do dragons, are they natural creatures? Meaning, are they just from this world? They just exist? Or were they created by merging wyverns and fireworms? Think about wyverns. Is that wyverns are basically dragons that don't breathe fire. Okay? And fireworms are dragons without wings. They do breathe fire, but they don't have wings, and they live in the rock. So if you cross them, you do get dragons. I do want to point out, however, counterpoint, they could just be related. They could just be related species. George is obviously showing us a magical evolution with some of these species here, or at least it seems to be. And so it could just be that wyverns and dragons are related species, and one of them developed the ability to breathe fire and the other didn't. That would make sense as well. But Crowfood's Daughter's videos are about the idea that they were, in fact, combined to make dragons. So Araya's worms are kind of the key to both of those theories. So it's a very interesting story, even though it's disturbing. Then we have Daemon's song and lemur theory. And I should have pulled a picture of the lemur. I will. I'll pull a picture of the lemur. Since we have it. You don't get to use it often. It's by Kevin Catalan. There's our cute lemur. Purple eyes and silver fur. They're called little Valyrians. It's a very weird little detail. Can you explain more on the notion that the Valyrians bred the dragons for different purposes? What other purposes were there? Well, the mucker, I gave you everything I could on that. It's all speculation. The only one that's listed is war. I'm extrapolating the rest. So feel free to think about it harder and come up with some yourself. But yeah, that's all the ones I could come up with. Was that list that I gave you. Maybe you'd have singing dragons. The dragons, their sounds are described as song by Danny at one point. Oh, got a Clio on the monitor. Sorry, I won't let that go for long. I'll let her just have it for a minute. So maybe you breed some for song. But yeah, that's all I got. Okay, yeah, let me get yours, Nate. Hang on. If the Targs had dragons bred for war, why weren't they more powerful amongst the ruling class of Valyria? Well, that's a good question. And I just haven't gotten to that maybe. Or maybe I did skip over it. Yeah. So Valyria, of course, they have these freeholder families, right? They share power amongst these 40 families. The Targaryens are not the most powerful. Well, it's kind of like maybe, your generals, hey, Cleo, come here. You don't get to bite me, and you don't get to be on my monitor. The generals aren't always the presidents, right? So if the Targaryens are in charge of the war dragons, they're kind of like generals. Other families might have been in charge of the mages that bank the fires of the 14 flames, or the blood mages who do the magic, or the messenger dragons, or they just were richer and older. So there's a lot of different reasons why. But it's a good question. Here's your dragon egg. Here's your tapeworm. That's right. Thanks, Ecuador and Geo Ninja. So lemur theory. Why did George create these little Valyrian lemurs? Well, the answer revealed itself when you look up what the meaning of the word lemur is and what the beliefs are that are associated with lemurs. And this is Western people coming to Madagascar and like poorly translating myth. Okay, so this is rough summary. And if we talk to the I think it's Malagasy people of Madagascar, they might have a more specific clarification. But in some sense, lemurs are associated with ghosts for a couple of reasons. One, they kind of they're nocturnal and they have big glowing eyes. And a lot of them are white. And so they're ghostly looking. So I think it's more because of the noises they make. They make these sort of scary howling noises. They come from the jungle at night. Probably scared the crap out of the Europeans and stuff. But I believe there is also local beliefs about the lemurs being repositories for their ancestor spirits. Perhaps because they look and sound like ghosts. I don't know. But these are the ideas that you find when you look it up. Cleo, no, you can't be on there. I'm sorry. You can't. I got to put you over here. And so the idea that's associated with lemurs is that they are ghosts or that they have ghosts inside them. I'll answer that super chat in just a question with bad news. Sorry. And so by George creating lemurs and calling them little Valyrians, he's basically saying Valyrians are people whose ghosts live inside of animals, because lemurs are animals that are believed to possess ancestor spirits. Okay? And so are Valyrian ancestor ghosts in lemurs? No, they're not. They're in dragons, not lemurs. But the lemur gives us the parallel and makes us think about animals that have ancestor ghosts inside of them, which is what the lemurs are. So that makes us think, oh, maybe that's what the dragons are. And so this is another part of the dragon bond. So one, you have people that have reptile DNA. That's step one. But if you could stuff your ancestor ghost inside the dragon, well, now you've really got a basis for a psychic connection. And also this is an explanation for why the dragons are tied to families. So the Targaryens have their war dragons. Well, if the dragon bond is tied to an initial ancestor sacrifice, some sort of blood magic event where you kill Grandpa Targaryen or brother or uncle Targaryen, you stuff his spirit into the dragon, now his descendants and relatives have a connection to the dragon. They are blood. They share blood link with that dragon because their kin is in the dragon. Okay, so it's another take on Blood of the Dragon. 1 second. And so, yes, this may be the key to how the Targaryens bond with dragons and how the dragons are monopolized by the different lineages in Valyria. And so, how do you do it? And how do you stuff the spirit into the dragon? Oh, Daemon's song as more evidence. So the lyrics to Daemon's song, basically, he's talking about two heads sing as one, but to a third sing. So him and the dragon are these two heads that are audibly singing in the room. But the lyrics of the song imply that they too are singing to the third head. And then they're saying words about awakening and calling forth and talking about the blood magic that created you and stuff. Okay. And so what I believe that this is a clue about is that the third head of the dragon is a spirit inside the dragon. And that is what Daemon is doing there. Him and Vermithor, through the magic of this song, they are calling to the ancestor spirit in the dragon. And that would potentially prepare Vermithor for a fresh dragon bond. And it establishes some kind of link between Daemon and the dragon so that he can safely communicate to it, maybe lead it out to be bonded with or something like that. Maybe he's testing the dragon to see if it wants to bond again, something like that. But the lyrics of the song, again, imply that there's a mysterious third head that is being sung to. It's like, and what is that head? There's Daemon's head. There's the dragon's head. Where's the third head? And that statement, three heads has the dragon, is older than House Targaryen and their sigil. So where's the third dragon head? It's the spirit. Okay. And so if we go back to the Valyrian sphinxes, they might also be a clue about this. Because the Valyrian sphinxes have the bodies of dragons and the heads of humans. And so that statue might be a depiction of the idea that a dragon animal can be controlled by a human, that a human can be the head of a dragon. And if there's an ancestor spirit in the dragon, then that's literally what's going on. That's literally what the statue is showing us, that there is a head, like a spirit, an awareness of a human inside the dragon body. So that might be why the Sphinx is the riddle and not the Riddler, because the Sphinx, the Valyrian Sphinxes, are a riddle about the dragon bond. Let me get this super chat here. I got a couple. Are the lemurs still alive? Yes, in the forests of Qohor. And thank you. They have one stuffed at the Citadel whose head is bald because it's been rubbed for good luck too many times. But yes, they still have them in the forests of Qohor. Going along with the familial spirit being in the dragon, do you think Dany's dragon have any spirits? Aegon, Visenya, or Rhaenys in them with their names being a hint? No. So I'm going to get to this in a second, but you'd have to do an intentional blood magic ceremony to stuff a spirit into a dragon. So Dany's dragons could have the spirits of Drogo, Rhaego, and Mirri Maz Duur in them. So if there's a Mirri Maz Duur descendant running around, they could be able to bond with Dany's dragons, according to my theory. But that's more of a death paid for life thing, I think. We'll talk about dragonbinder in a second. Somebody asked if there's a way the dragons can survive at the end of the books. I really doubt it. Maybe a dragon's egg that could hatch one day. Can't wait for Fire and Blood 2. Yep. I mean, there's a chance they could live, but I doubt it. I doubt it. Thank you, Kate Monster. Quite welcome. So, sorry guys, I'll just keep clearing my throat as many times as I need to keep going. Dragonbinder, I think, is how the link is. This is how the spirit stuffing is done for a couple reasons. Dragonbinder implies that it is delivering blood for fire and fire for blood. And so the idea with that is like, oh, well, it calls a dragon, and that's how it's delivering fire and blood. And then Dany thinks to herself that, the ancient Valyrians were said to control their dragons with sorcerer's horns. So the idea is that these horns can control the dragons, right? Well, the Targaryens don't have horns to control their dragons, and they mostly do pretty well. You know, when we look at House of the Dragon with Aemond, it's like, oh, well, Vhagar didn't obey him. Well, Vhagar did obey him, though, didn't she? Like, Aemond hates Luke and was using Vhagar to taunt him dangerously, and then tried to pull up at the last second. That's the only command that Vhagar didn't understand, because dragons don't understand pulling up at the last second. We're going to talk about dragon fights later, but they don't stop. Once they're engaged in a fight, they never disengage. Never. So that was Aemond being foolish. For the most part, the dragons do follow the commands of their riders. When Silverwing refuses to fly across the wall with Alysanne, she says that's the first and only time that Silverwing ever refused her commands. So the Targaryens don't need dragon horns, and presumably neither would the Valyrians. They have more dragon arts than the Targs do. So why do you really need a dragon horn? Well, think about controlling the dragon in a more permanent sense. The dragon horns were used to establish control over the dragon. So the sentence is still true, but you don't need one to maintain moment to moment commands. It's not like a dog whistle that you blow all the time. Because it takes human sacrifice to blow the bloody thing. It doesn't make sense. You wouldn't keep slaves around for every time you need to toot the horn. Be like, go left, kill a new slave, toot the horn. Go right. Like, it doesn't make sense. None of that makes sense. They don't use the horns to issue commands moment to moment. Which means the horns are used in controlling the dragons some other way. And that some other way would be establishing the dragon bond. And this makes sense of why Euron has it. Euron isn't a Valyrian, but he really wants to be. He's got Valyrian armor, and he thinks he can be Azor Ahai Reborn or the Bloodstone Emperor Reborn. Okay? And he clearly wants to steal a dragon. He's promising the Ironborn is going to get a dragon. So how's he going to do that? How's he going to ride a dragon? Well, with the dragonbinder horn, obviously. So how does that work, though? Is he just blow the horn once and then it obeys him? Everybody's foggy, including Vic and Makoro, on how this is supposed to work. Well, this theory gives you an explanation. There's a lot of signs that Victarion is being tempted to blow the horn, and that it's beginning to call to him like the One Ring. And so if Victarion blows it, he will likely die. But what will happen is that his spirit, because I think Euron will have set this spell in place already, or potentially Makoro will enable this. When Victarion blows it, his spirit will get stuffed into the dragon that's nearby, whether that's like Viserion or probably Viserion, possibly Rhaegal, but more likely Viserion. And once Victarion is in Viserion, then Euron, who is Victarion's blood, will be able to form a normal dragon bond with Viserion, because his brother's spirit will be in the dragon. And so there's a theory for you, by the way. Winds of Winter predictions. This is the trap. This is the trick. It's not the dusky woman. It's Dragonbinder. And it's going to... The sacrifice of Victarion is going to enable Euron to then bond with the dragon. And that means that if Viserion goes on to lay eggs, we don't know what gender or sex. I keep saying gender when I mean sex. We don't know what sex Viserion is. So if Viserion can lay eggs, then that lineage of dragons could now bond with all of Euron's descendants, or the other Greyjoys. Even Theon or Asha's descendants could probably work too. So I think this is how The Valyrians monopolize their dragons through their family lines, and this is why they do the inbreeding. So that other people, because once you marry into the Targ family, your children, even your bastard children, could claim a dragon. And the Targaryens can't have just anybody claiming a dragon. So, this, I believe, is the true purpose of Dragonbinder, and that's why Euron has it, because he needs it, because he's not a Valyrian. And that's why Vic is a sucker. So, the Daemon's Song, Lemur Theory, and Dragonbinder, they all fit together, and they tell the story of how the Dragon Bond is created. Maybe. You use this dragon horn or other sorts of a magic song or sound to sacrifice an ancestor. You put them in the dragon. You probably need a little blood magic. Like I said, maybe Makoro will facilitate the transfer, or maybe Euron already set the spell, or Dragonbinder does it already. But yeah, this allows people to claim the lineage. This explains how there's a Valyrian ancestor ghost in the dragon, and that explains how 3 Heads has the dragon. So I really like that stuff. However, what if it's wrong? What if, let's change the picture to, oh, I don't know, just a different dragon. What do we got here? We'll do the Field of Fire. Oh no, Dreamfire. That's what we need, Dreamfire. So what if you can skin change a dragon? This is a super old idea. It's a logical idea because who's my favorite Hot D character? I think probably Bela and Jace, who I just did that video about. I mean, I love Nettles a lot. I did a video about her. Yeah, those are the good ones. Cleo. You can be on that computer, but you just can't be in front of the camera, girl. It's very Godzilla-like for the people watching at home. Alan. Is it Adam? Adam Valerian. Yeah. Adam of Hull. Well, I'm answering, how does dragon pair bonding work? Well, I think that's what I'm answering. So yes, if Euron takes control of the dragon, that works very well with the idea that he's going to get body snatched by the spirit of the Great Other, because the Great Other is Azor Ahai in the Weirwood Net, an original Azor Ahai. Cleo, step up. You can't be on there. She always wants to be on this laptop, and I never let her. Sorry, girl. There's a reason why. Defensive. Rise up. Don't encourage her. So, okay. Skin changers can inhabit animals with their spirits. So the only question of why wouldn't a skin changer be able to skin change a dragon is the fact that dragons are fire-made flesh. They are different than other animals. They are hot in a different way. They're not just hot-blooded. Like the arrows that lodge in Drogon's scales, the arrowheads begin to melt. The metal begins to melt. That's how hot the dragon is. That's why I'm saying I don't even know if normal people could really even touch the dragons without like burning their hands. And if it's not burning hot, it's just below that. And we're specifically given the idea that fire is painful for skin changers. When Bran tries to hop in Summer, when Summer is hurt, it's described as being like trying to touch a hot knife. Like Bran, his spirit recoils from Summer's body instinctively, like your hand touching a stove. You can't really make yourself keep touching it. It's an instinct, right? And then also, Varamir Sixskins is burned out of his eagle by Mel. She lights the eagle on fire. That evicts the spirit from the animal. And so, to me, it just makes sense that, Bran or another skin changer, they're not going to be able to skin change a dragon. It's too hot. It's too foreign of a mind. And we're also told that the minds of different animals affect how hard they are to skin change. So like birds are more of a challenge. And if you spend too long in birds, you get all moony-eyed and you hate being back in your body because you can't fly. And Borok is super nasty, like his boar, even though pigs are smart and we shouldn't cast aspersions on pigs. Wild boar are nasty. And so, yeah, the nature of the animal matters to the skin changer. However, there's a couple of ways around this. One, maybe the uber skin changer can force themselves to do it. Maybe Bran can. Okay. Bloodraven is a blood of the dragon person who's also a skin changer. So maybe he could do it, or someone like him. Maybe someone like Melisandre, who is transforming her physiology into one that is fueled by fire magic. If someone like that were also a skin changer and they were to make themselves fiery first, then maybe they could skin change a dragon. Jon Snow's going to get fire whited. I do think he will retain his skin changer magic. If he's animated by R'hllor, he might be able to skin change a dragon. I don't know why he'd need to because he's a Targaryen, but maybe he'd be able to. So there are some possibilities for that. And obviously the fact that the dragon bond is partly psychic could be a mutated form of the skin changer bond, which is also psychic. That goes without saying. So I favor that it's just a parallel, because if we're talking about, the ancestor ghosts are in the dragons, well, that's the same thing as with the green seers and the skin changers, right? Their ancestor spirits are in the trees and in the animals, in the second life shadows. So I think that this is just a parallel, but it could be that skin changing was somehow mutated through fire magic, and that the entire dragon bond thing is a fire altered version of skin changing. That has long been a theory as well. They're both good theories. They both would make sense, and George could make them work, right? Let me get a fresh drink, and I will put on music, but I will not play the whole thing because I just need to run to the fridge and back. But guess what? You can get some Reading Rhaegar again. Actually, no, I'll show you, I believe this is, there you go. Sorry, the Hightower, obviously. No music yet. I'll get the music going on this. Hum to yourselves, but enjoy the tower. There we go. Sorry, I forgot how to get back to my screen. Apologies. There's the Hightower. And in case you missed it, artist Chetan Biswas, who you can find on ArtStation. If somebody would pull the link for that, it is linked in the Euron live stream description, and I think you can just put in Chetan Biswas
ArtStation and find it. He also did some really cool artwork of Yeen as well, which I used in my Sithorios video, and we'll surely be having him build some stuff in the future. But we spared no expense on the High Tower and the Fewstone Fortress, and we'll come back to the Fewstone in a minute. But let's talk about this David J. Peterson thing, because this is super duper cool. And thank you, the person that tagged me about this on Twitter, whose name I did not write down. Apologies. But of course, once again, David J. Peterson, he is the person in charge of the Valyrian language. And so, yeah, I can't read that. I don't know what that says. But what says this? I'm not going to try to pronounce all that. But here's the translation. Oh, thank God. Shrubbery, being a history on the flora of the Valyrian freehold by Maester Michaelian. So I think it's got to be a a reference. Oh, I got some more super chats. Yeah, let me grab those. Thank you, mods. Thank you. Let's see what we got. Oh, we got a bunch. Man, you guys are awesome. Toothless wipes any A Song of Ice and Fire dragon fight me. Well, the more interesting discussion, and I will not fight you because I love How to Train a Dragon, is the mutual influence of the two franchises. Oh, we're doing without colored light for the rest of the time. You guys will forgive me. But hey, it kind of matches my shirt. So there's a lot of stuff in How to Train Your Dragon that's clearly drawn from Ice and Fire. But I think at a certain point, Ice and Fire is drawing on How to Train Your Dragon. So I think they're mutually influencing each other. And I might make a video about it one day because it's pretty cool. But yeah, we're always here for some Toothless shout outs. And then, do you think the tapestries are just a metaphor? Yes. That's exactly right. The tapestries have got to be a metaphor. I just don't think it's literally people and dragons putting their parts in each other's holes. I just don't think that's it. I think George is more creative than that. And so I think the tapestries are metaphorical. Yes. They also serve to, they're edgy, like every time you see a non-Targaryen, like when young Alicent in her green dresses and she's standing there, or in her red dress and she's got a little baby, and there's this just dragon orgy on the wall behind her and everyone's desensitized to it. Like, it's there to remind you that they're weird and different, So yeah. And yet, Dany naming the dragons after the people that she fondly holds in memory could speak to this idea of sacrificed ancestors. Yeah. Yeah, it's very Holy Spirit, Christian Trinity. It sort of reminds you of that. Yeah, I agree with that, Mark. And then let me get back to the chat. All right. Thank you, Ian. So, the doom the doom of the Valyrian freehold saw a peninsula and its people consumed by fire and smoke. An entire civilization, its inhabitants and their gods, their loves, grudges, guilts, and pain, all drowned in a sea of ash and sorrow. None who dwelt there survived, nor did their histories. The library of Tyria, the largest and most renowned repository of knowledge of its day, was destroyed. Books, scrolls, and tomes turned to cinder. But while the fate of memory seemed sealed, not all was lost. Elsewhere on the continent of Essos were dragon lords spending time away from their homelands. Some were on patrols, and some to exact punishment upon anyone who dared defy the power of Valyria. Yet one other, whose name has come down to us, was a way to take stock of the foliage, plants, and teal mosses known throughout the resplendent forests of Qohor. Jahalor Materion, a freeborn landowner
and gardener by trade and passion, was at work collecting samples when the earth shook and the sky turned red. As the days passed and the news traveled, it became clear that Chehalor's home, family, and people had been destroyed. Not knowing. Let me just make sure. Are we, yes, we're up to date. Okay. Not knowing if he was the last of the dragon riders, Chehalor packed his bags and flew to the southeasternmost of the free cities, Valeria's first daughter in Volantis. Valeria's first daughter, which was Volantis. It was there, if tales can be believed, where he spent the remainder of his life scratching everything he could remember of his gardens on sheets of parchment so long they rivaled the broad stone highways of his people. Chehalor's dragon died in captivity not 3 years later, unable or forbidden to ride her who can truly say. Her leathern wings are said to have shriveled after refusing sheep, goat, dog, and horse. So this just shows you, like, if you had the road crew dragons and they never had to fly, they'd eventually evolve smaller wings. They'd get down to like little vestigial wings. They'd be like T-Rex arms, potentially. And they'd have giant bodies and thick necks and really hot fires. So yeah, I mean, we should just assume that the Valyrians with 5,000 years would be shaping the evolution of the dragons and breeding them this way and that. So Chehalor himself did not long outlive his dragon, passing from this mortal coil at the age of 5 and 50 while traversing the Long Bridge, and that's in Volantis. It was there he saw two masters exacting punishment against their slaves. Tearfully, the gardener flung himself between the victims and the whip, collapsing after being lashed for nigh on an hour. That is a tale for another time, however, and beyond our current purview. So that is a really interesting detail, and this is why I'd like to know if this is George canon or not. Because this is somebody who might be the last Valyrian. And what is he doing? He's risking his life to stop slavery and abuse. And my theory, which I'll get to, is that Aenar Targaryen helped engineer the Doom as an abolition, because it was one of the only ways to prevent another 5,000 years of awful Valyrian slavery. And so here we have another abolitionist Valyrian. I told you that they would exist. Inevitably, there are always people who question the current status quo, even if most people are indoctrinated, and desensitized to the evil of something like slavery or systemic racism. There is still going to be people who have clear vision and can say this is wrong. And so this is interesting. This gardener, a peaceful man, gardener, still a dragon rider, but anti-slavery, and in fact gave up his life. So pretty cool. Interesting detail. But let's talk about the plants. And then, of course, Dany, an abolitionist. She is, her and Jon, the last Valyrians, and they're both abolitionists in a way. Jon's pro-free folk. It's slightly different. Dany's one straight out. In any case, bound in twine and stored expertly within the Black Walls, Chehalor's writings were gifted to the Citadel on this, the 4th day of the 4th moon of 36 AC. So this is at the end of the reign of Aegon, a couple of years into Aenys' reign, I believe. No, Aegon died in 37. This is the very end of Aegon's reign. It's now passed to me, this is Maester so-and-so, to cement his memories into the bold minds of those who passed through this, the greatest repository of knowledge in the known world, and that would be the Citadel. Fortunately for us, the majority of Chehalor's accounts detail his passion for plant, leaf, moss, and tree. Further is an exhaustive description of his glass orb greenhouse, which is said to have been built into the topless towers of the Materions, held in place by no less than 33 stone sphinxes with eyes of garnet. So just some random Valyrian detail here. Okay. The topless towers, they're just very tall, obviously. Held in place by no less than 33 stone sphinxes. So there is some sort of glass orb greenhouse at the top of the towers, owned by the Materions, who is the house of this gardener. It's pretty, like I said, the Valyrians were also cultured and advanced, as well as being, horrendous, icky blood magicians. And so, yeah, this sounds incredible. And this glass orb greenhouse says, let us so begin with the base of all things, soil. It must be emphasized that the volcanic soils of old Valyria were much different than those found in Westeros, save for Dragonstone, that small island sitting at the mouth of Blackwater Bay. It is from this soil that our first plant springs, the silk grasses of Valyria, blossoming and stretching their glossy fingers up as if alive. These tendrils are written to have braided and folded themselves apart and together again like coils of rope. If Jahalar can be believed, these grasses also laid the foundation for almost every meal on the Valyrian peninsula as garnishment. Though it must be noted that while this variety of vegetation was enjoyed by dragon lords and their kin, it was forbidden to slaves. So that's interesting. Just shows you a little bit of the Valyrian supremacy. And it almost reminds me of the way that, like, rice is this ubiquitous staple, in ancient Chinese culture. It's like at every meal, right? So maybe it's something like that. But they're weird grasses. They twine together like fingers. It just gets weirder. So in a sad turn of events, Jahalar himself describes his own misfortune of having walked in on a bed slave, Narha, nibbling on this particular fruit of his precious soil. Forced to slit her wrists with his Valyrian steel blade, he notes having bottled her blood and using it to nourish his ruby ferns, which he then describes as having grown to extraordinary heights. So, it's interesting. In a different situation, he gives up his life to save a slave from being chastised. But here, he has to regrettably carry out the legal sentence of execution on the slave. So this is showing us the complexity. It's not easy to be an abolitionist or a peaceful person, I guess. But we also can see that there are ruby ferns, a kind of fern which is nourished by blood. So the forced in quotes, exactly. It's the legal sentence that he was mandated to carry out. So in any case, thank you for pointing that out. So the ruby ferns are some kind of ferns that, like the weirwoods, consume blood. So it's not just the weirwoods. Other plants consume blood. They may be magic or they may not be. But that's interesting. Now let us turn to the fruits of Jahalar's gardens, most notable of which is described as a purple mango with crawling vines. In his writings, the fruit is described as so dense and yet so nourishing that it could fuel a soldier on long journeys, available to nobles alone. It is written that only those pure of heart could ingest it. In a formal trial or familial dispute, the fruit was often said to be invoked as judgment. Oh, I see. So if someone isn't pure of heart, they'll die if they eat it. Yeah, okay, it's interesting. Jahalar's own mother, it pains me to note, ingested it and passed from this world after a bloody stool and a terrible cramping in the gut. I would be remiss to note, however, that there are known poisons that bring its victims to similar ends, most notably the tears of Lys. Yet, as Jahalar mentions having no wife or female siblings, this notion can most certainly be discarded, as poison is known to be a woman's weapon. Okay, maesters. Where the red fern grows. Oh, nice. Yeah, totally. That's funny. So I don't know what's up with this. Jahalar's mother, why did she have to, was she involved in a trial or a dispute? I don't know. But there you go. Let us turn to an examination of the White Tree of Flames. So this is interesting. This reminds us both of the White Tree of Gondor and the White Flame of Tar Valon from Wheel of Time, which has a white tower and some other stuff going on. So let us, the White Tree of Flames, known in the Freehold for the coppery sheen of its leaves, its pungent roots are said to have grown above ground, twisting around its own trunk like the walls of some great keep. According to his writings, and of course the unreliability of memory cannot be gainsaid, Jehalar claims only one such tree existed, and that in his own orb of glass high atop a tower overlooking a city distorted through ripples of heat. If so, and if Jehalar's claims are true, what might that mean? Where did this tree come from? From whence came its seed? Could it be that the ancient gods of Valyria were of some distant relation to the children of the forest? There's no mention of a face carved in its bark, but Jehalar does describe it with a certain reverence, as if a living wood, as powerful as fire. So, this is probably the weirdest thing. Like coppery, that could be bronze looking, or that could be just reddish. This could be another way of describing red leaves, and that's why they're saying, is this weirwood? One thing about the roots growing above ground, the weirwood roots do kind of grow everywhere. And we also have this question of the original form of the weirwoods having been different, having had green leaves on the Isle of Faces. Maybe that's a way that, like, to trap green seers. Instead of being imprisoned down in the roots, maybe they're backing up to the trunk of the tree and then getting woven into it. I'm not sure. It's most likely that George is showing us simply that there are other magic trees. There's weirwoods, there's Shade of the Evening trees, there's the golden heart trees on the Summer Isles, which could be magical. And then there's this thing. Whatever that is. But it is a white tree. So, and the idea is the coppery leaves that's, give it the flame look. That's why it's the tree of flame. Well, the weirwood leaves also look like a blaze of flame. So, yeah. So then we've got, let us finally turn our gaze to the jeweled mosses of Valyria. Twinkling, like beacons guiding ships to harbor, the spores of these flowerless green plants are described as having erupted from stalked capsules. Jeweled mosses, they have no flowers. The spores erupt from the stalks and would cover the glass windows of the gardens if not pruned once every moon. Huh. Weird. Along with its impressive growth came a scent Jehalar described as akin to the fruit of Meraxes' scepter. Though known to us as the she-dragon of the Light Queen Rhaenys, Meraxes was named after one of the many old gods of Valyria. That this god had a scent is new to us, however, and Jehalar gives us no other clue than to say, the stench is so sour, it inflames the stinging hairs of my nettles. And that's it. So I'm not sure. Meraxes' scepter must be a tree or a bush that has fruit, which smells very sour, apparently. So that's interesting. That is interesting. So is not a huge revelation to come from that, but it's just some really cool information about Valyria that nobody's ever heard before, unless you've come across that. So thought I would pass that along. And again, that's from David J. Peterson's blog. And you can follow him online, DEDALVS. That's his social media handle pretty much everywhere.
Sorry, I had to get my Clio. All right, so moving along. Let's talk about the Doom. Where's some Doom? I've got some Doom art. Should have made this part bigger. I know, girl. Looking at these tiny, teeny, tiny little thumbnails. The Doom. Here it is. This is Urtach Altanaz on the left and Water Sorcerer on the right. So the Doom that came to Valyria, guys, probably had something to do with the Faceless Men. They claim that they did. And interestingly, they only claim this to Arya. The Kindly Man says this to Arya, that they had something to do with the Doom. But they don't like publicly say it. So it's not like propaganda. They're not telling people they did it when they didn't. So everyone's afraid of the Faceless Men. Everyone's already terrified of the Faceless Men. Okay. But in confidence, he mentions to Arya that, yeah, they also bring the gift to the masters. But that's another story. So we don't know how they did it. But the Faceless Men were partly responsible for the Doom. Now, there is speculation elsewhere that it might have had something to do with the assassination of mages, the ones that banked the fires of the 14 Flames. They say maybe it was Valyrian politics that led to the assassination of too many mages, and the volcanoes are out of control because they're using magic to maintain volcanic equilibrium. They lived on volcanoes for 5,000 years, and we don't ever hear about major eruptions wiping out their cities. So, when they talk about banking the fires of the 14 Flames, they're using fire sorcery to keep them stable at a simmer. So all you'd have to do is kill enough of those mages, and then they would naturally go out of control, and all the pent-up tension would explode. And it just so happens the Faceless Men, what do? They kill people. They pull off assassinations. So it's easy to see how the Faceless Men caused the Doom. However, it may have been an inside job in that Aenar Targaryen may have been a part of it. Because it is implied... Where do I even start with this theory? There's so much with this. I'm doing a pretty good job of summing up some long theories so far. Okay. So the idea starts with the fact that Aenar leaves. He has his daughter Daenerys has the dream of the Doom 12 years before it happens. And so they move all of their stuff to Dragonstone. All the other Valyrians laugh at them because they're moving to the backwater, right? Never mind the fact they're getting rich off of selling Valyrian steel to Westeros, But the center of politics is Valyria. So they're moving away from that. That's unfathomable to the other Valyrian houses. But Daenerys had the dream. And then so when the Doom came, they were far enough away and they survived. And then they were the only Dragon Lords left. However, they didn't press that advantage. They didn't conquer Westeros for over 100 years. So Aenar clearly wasn't like, let me wipe out my fellow Valyrians in order to be the only Dragon Lord left alive so I can be the Emperor. Like, that's not what he did. But there is a lot of clues about Bright Roar being involved in this. Okay, so the Lannisters, right before the Doom, they bought a Valyrian steel sword. And they bought a very fancy one. Would have cost a lot of money. And it is hinted at that the price of a Faceless Man and a Valyrian steel sword is similar. And so who would have sold the Lannisters Bright Roar? Oh, then there's also, that's what I'm skipping. There's a prophecy in Valyria that the gold of Casterly Rock will lead to the doom of mankind, or to their doom. And so, how does the gold of Casterly Rock pay for the doom has always been the puzzle. Well,
It's easy. They bought Bright Roar. And who did they buy Bright Roar from? The Targaryens. Because that's what Dragonstone was set up to do, was to trade Valyrian steel and other goods with Westeros. And we know the Westerosi love Valyrian steel. There's over 200 Valyrian steel weapons running around Westeros. They bought it up. So the Targaryens are getting rich off selling this steel. Derek is saying they could also kill the slaves who were to be sacrificed to maintain the spells. No, because they'd have to kill all the slaves to do that. That would be crazy when you could just kill a few of the mages instead. And he literally says they brought the gift to the masters too. I mean, I guess that's the Doom itself. But yeah, no, that doesn't make sense to kill a whole bunch of slaves because they can always get more. So, okay, so the inside job, Lannister gold, it's flowing into Dragonstone with the purchase of Bright Roar, which is enough to buy an army. But they didn't buy an army. They bought Faceless Men to cause the Doom. So what I think happened is essentially that Aenar was an abolitionist, because inevitably there would be abolitionists. Like I said before, there would be. And how do you get everyone to stop? Okay? Like, if I wanted capitalism to start behaving itself, or if I wanted America to stop having military bases in foreign countries, not to get all political, but like, I don't have that choice. Okay? That's not on the ballot either. Neither choice for president, and probably none of the third party ones either, have a legitimate plan to close all 200 or however many there are American military bases, right? Similarly, if you're, and please don't go crazy in the chat, just follow the analogy. If you're a Valyrian and you don't like the slavery and the blood magic, how do you get it to stop? You can try to talk about it at Congress. You can sign the petition and stuff, but this empire is built on might makes right. It's built on battle dragons, domination, and sorcery, and blood magic. So the only way to really end, if you really were serious about ending the 5,000 years of genocide and slavery and all this stuff, the only way to do it is to take out all the dragons at once, because you can't fight the dragons. Aenar and his 5 dragons can't overthrow everyone else. And so the Doom becomes an abolition. And that's why I have a video called The Doom Was an Abolition. It becomes the only way to stop another 5,000 or 15,000 years of this shit. And so Aenar did this horrible thing of killing all his countrymen. And this is, again, my theory. But he prevented this from happening. And this is why I mentioned earlier that the Targaryens, they didn't keep up any of the horrible practices of the Valyrians. And that sort of fits with this idea. They didn't keep making Valyrian steel or dragonbinder horns, which use blood magic. Aenar brought his Valyrian slaves to Dragonstone, but they must have become his small folk, because slavery is outlawed on Westeros, and we never hear about the Targaryens owning slaves once they get there. So they probably just became the small folk of Dragonstone and Driftmark. and then he hung tight. He did not go and conquer people or reestablish Valyria or anything like that. So to me, it all fits with the abolition. You can get the whole story in that video. But that's it. And here's the man himself. Let me find Aenar. I've got him here. Where's Aenar? There he is. It's kind of a dark image, but that's Aenar landing on Dragonstone with his dragon. And this is by Isalinka. So, yeah, there's the sunset behind him. It's barbarian Aenar. I like it. But here's how I think this might have happened. We know the dragon dreams are legit. And originally I was thinking maybe the dream is just a cover story. And he really plotted the doom the whole time. Cleo says yes. Cleo. So maybe it's a cover story. But here's the thing. What if it's more like a self-fulfilling prophecy? What if it's more like, come here, girl. Come here. What if it's more like, at first, they have the prophecy. And then they move away. He's like, oh God, the doom is coming. We got to move. But then over time, he begins to think about it. He's like, wait, maybe this is the golden path, if you will. Maybe this is actually a plan. Maybe this is a vision from the future that I need to make come true. We see people like Melisandre doing that. All right. And so maybe this vision of the future of Daenys the Dreamer became Aenar's plan. It's like, oh, this is how we can stop it. If I was making a TV show about this, by the way, HBO, I'd have Daenys be the young revolutionary who eventually, as she grows, because she has the dream when she's young, they move away, then 12 years go by. She gets radicalized on Dragonstone against slavery as she grows up. With her visits back to Valyria, she convinces her father, radicalizes Aenar, and brings him about to see the evil. He's like, come on, Dad, you know it's wrong. He's like, yeah, it is. You're right. But that's too extreme. No, Dad, it's the only way. The dream was a message. That would be sick. That's how I picture it. And one of the reasons why is the Melniboné parallel. So Elric, he dooms his own nation. He sentences it to death. He leads a foreign army into the capital city and allows their civilization to be overthrown because it's so corrupt. So Elric essentially passes judgment on his own people and leads to its downfall. And I think that is essentially, that would be the inspiration for my theory about Aenar, would be Elric. So, other parallels for the Doom, obviously Atlantis and Numenor, because the Doom is not only the eruption, then the land sunk into the sea, and the floods, the sea waters came in, and it cut up the peninsula into islands. So it did sink, like Atlantis or Numenor. It just exploded first. Numenor also exploded, by the way. So there's also the fall of Troy and Pompey, a couple of Greek stories and legends that probably influenced some of this, especially like the movie, if you think about the older version of the fall of Troy. And then, Melniboné, I mentioned that. The doom that came to Sarnath from Lovecraft. We've talked about that extensively, but this is... all these stories are the same. It's all about hubris, Cleo. It's about humans being too big for their britches, like some birds I know, and bringing doom down upon themselves. So, that's what we're talking about. And there was also Orion, the last emperor of Valyria. He is a dragon lord, not like the gardener, the peaceful guy. He flew back to Valyria and thought that he could be Cleo. Your toe's on by the camera. He thought that he could make himself the emperor of Valyria. He got 30,000 troops together in Qohor and led them into Valyria, never to be seen again. He flew off on his dragon, never seen again. And the doom is not survivable to most people. But that's Orion. Other dragon lords that survived were killed by the citizens they had formerly been, dominating and abusing. So that's why they were talking about that gardener. Maybe he wasn't allowed to fly his dragon in Volantis, potentially. And it didn't live. He only, lived 3 years. The dragon didn't live long. So on a thematic level, these dragons They really are burning a hole through the world. That's what I wrote here. They've destroyed everything that where they've come from. Okay. And this is the nature of fire, right? George says fire consumes, ice preserves. Ice is also compared to hate, which is like a long-term grudges, preserved emotions. Whereas fire is more like rage, an instantaneous flare-up of rage. But the long hatred, that's cold. You see what I mean? Anger is hot. Rage is hot. Hatred is cold. And this is not even, George didn't invent that. That's just how we think about it. So these dragons, there's a legend about them coming from the moon. The moon exploded. And that's how it gave birth to dragons. Now, those are meteors, not flesh and blood dragons. I don't think they flap down from the moon. But nevertheless, it sets the template. The moon explodes and it creates dragons. So dragons are created in an act of destruction. Now, the first dragons come from Shai, which we still haven't talked about somehow. Chattis, thank you. The first dragons came from Shai, and Shai is ruined. It is exploded. It got hit with one of those long night meteors, if you ask me. So it got destroyed by dragons, and it was the first home of dragons, and the Bloodstone Emperor was some kind of evil dragon lord. Then we move on to Valyria, where those dragon lords got too big for their britches, and their empire got destroyed. And both Ashai and Valyria are some sort of magically blighted wasteland, right? It even continues on with the pattern. The dragon pit got destroyed. It is now ruined and crashed. And it's got parallels to the moon because the dome collapsed, just like the moon was like an egg when the dragons hatched and all this. And Dragonstone is a volcano. So if George wants to set that off, he can. So that could get exploded too. And thematically, this is the more important thing. It's sorcery. It's a sword without a hilt. There's no safe way to wield these extreme amounts of power. They're almost always used for destruction, right? So there is a constructive purpose for the dragons, which is to send them against the other magical threat of the others, right? But for the most part, Dany thinks about it. She sees the damage they can cause. She knows Maegor the Cruel. She knows the lessons of Valyria. So yeah, like the dragons, you could compare them to nuclear bombs or just chemistry. The ability to unlock the secrets of the atom has led not only to atomic bombs and nuclear power and all kinds of cool breakthroughs, it's also led to new diseases and chemicals that will never break down in thousands of years. Toxic waste. Chemistry is a power that mankind, if you put us in the cosmic courtroom and evaluated us on how we're using chemistry, there's a lot of pollution around the earth, isn't there? We're not doing the best with it. We are still wrestling with the ability to use great power like that in a constructive way. And so this is, I don't want to belabor the point, but that's what the dragons represent on one level. And so the Targaryens, like I said, show more conscience than the Valyrians. Most of them. Maegor is obviously a Valyrian throwback. But people like Aegon, the Conqueror, Jaehaerys, they're trying to rule a peaceful realm. Even Viserys, right? So, and like I said, not doing the whole slavery, blood magic, Kagossos thing. And then, of course, we have Daenerys, who is showing up in the story with her dragons. And what is she doing? She's going to Slaver's Bay, where the Valyrians learned how to do slavery. And she is ending slavery. And that's why she is cool. She's not a Red Keep burner. This is concept art by Kieran Belshaw. I was looking for, this is Drogon. Here's Dany. And where's the Giscari one? Here. So this is Mark Simonetti, Slaves of Old Gis. So these are the Valyrians enslaving the Giscarians, sowing their fields with salt 5,000 years ago or whatever. Dany comes here thousands of years later and uses her dragons to liberate slaves who are from all over Essos. And that's what the Valyrians did, is they took slaves from all over Essos. So it's pretty cool. I've pointed this out many times, don't need to belabor it, but yes, it's a poetic echo. It's atoning for the sins of the ancestors, because the thing is, Dany has the dragons only because of Valyria, only because blood magic and human sacrifice, and it's all these things. So the dragons are kind of an ill-gotten gain in that sense. Yes, she hatched them herself and all that. But the fact that humans can bond with dragons, it's because they did icky blood magic one time. And so she now inherits this power. So it is the most morally just and right thing that she can do, to use her dragons to clean up some of the mess of Valyria. And that's not why she's doing it. She's just doing it because it's right. But we as a reader can certainly notice that, right? I mean, I love that about Dany. So let's move on to pre-Valyrian dragon lore. Finally, it is time. So the Maesters, they tell us, and this is Balerion the Black Dread by Michael Comark. The Maesters tell us that dragon skeletons have been found all over the world. Okay, Alan Bennett's got a good follow-up question. Could you argue all dragon lords are villains? No, I don't think so. Every character is are their own human, and they should be judged by their own actions. So, like I said, Dany's using dragons to liberate slaves. That's heroic. There's no doubt. And obviously, that shows you that you can use a power as terrible as the dragons as a force for good. And her and Jon are almost certainly going to use them to help save the world, so that's good too. Jaehaerys was a good king. Alysanne was a better queen. So no. But anybody, I think, who uses the dragons to sort of just like make themselves powerful. That's why Aegon's prophecy is so interesting, because it changes the motivations. Oh, both, Larissa, both. But yes, the Maesters say the dragon skeletons have been found all over the world, which they then use. They come to the conclusion that, and they're commenting on Barth's theory that the Valyrians engineered them. The Maesters are like, yeah, but dragon skeletons have been found in like Ib and Westeros and all sorts of places. So that would imply that, there's this long vanished age before mankind where it was just giants and children of the forest and friggin' unicorns and green men and dragons. The wild dawn age that humans were born into. That could certainly be what George is implying. But it could just be, guys, that those are wyvern skeletons. They could be wyvern skeletons. Because dragons and wyverns, the skeletons look the same. Right? Unless the wyverns don't have the dark black bones. I guess we don't know. Maybe the wyverns don't have black bones and the dragons do. I guess that could be. But other than that, they wouldn't know the difference. I hadn't thought of that before. Maybe that's the answer. Maybe that's why they think there are dragon skeletons. They never say that, though. They never say that wyverns have white bones. There's a question for George. Do wyverns... You got to trick him into... He won't tell you if dragons come from wyverns. But you might trick him into telling you if wyverns have black teeth and bones like dragons. If he says yes, then... Anyway. So either dragons or wyverns are around, ancient past, leaving their skeletons everywhere in the fossil record. Now, we know that other magical beasts exist, as seemingly they are natural and not created. So the direwolves, unicorns, and the great lions of the rock are all mentioned by the children as magical beasts. Wyverns have beaks. Let me look this up. I thought it was beak-like. We're gonna find out. You might have me. This is good. This is what we're here to do. Let's see here. A species of reptile kin to dragons. They do not breathe fire. Leathery wings. Cruel beaks is a phrase that is used. Cruel beaks. That is true. And insatiable hunger. However, if they just have beak-like jaws, they could still call that cruel beak, I think. I think that's a word that can be kind of fuzzy. But that is potentially a point against the skeletons being interchangeable. I think white-boned wyvern is a slur that can get you flayed in certain parts of Essos. You yellow-bellied SOB. You white-boned wyvern. Okay. Oh, that's funny. All right, well, perhaps they have beaks, and perhaps the maesters can tell them apart. So maybe the question for George is, can you tell the difference? Are wyvern skeletons and dragon skeletons distinguishable? Do the wyverns have actual bird beaks or just beak-shaped jaws? And what colors are their bones? Please, do you have an answer, sir? George is like, I don't know. I'm just making this shit up. All right. So Joshua, in classic fantasy, wyverns and dragons are used as a way to delineate how many legs. So a wyvern does breathe fire, but only has 2 legs and 2 wings, whereas a dragon has 2 wings and 4 legs. That is not how George does it, though. In George's world, both dragons and wyverns have 2 legs and 2 wings. And George he got silly and pedantic and said, oh, well, 6 limb doesn't make sense. It's usually 4 or 8. So in George's world, wyverns are dragons that don't breathe fire and maybe have beaks and maybe have white bones, but we don't know. Okay. So like I said, there are other magical beasts in the world. And that makes me think that dragons could be natural. They don't have to be created. They could just be magically altered so that humans can bond with them and then bred under human control. It could just be stuffing the ancestor ghosts in them. And that's it. So I honestly go back and forth. Sometimes I think they are natural, and sometimes I think they do come from wyverns. Crowfood's daughter put me more towards the side of they were combined from fireworms and wyverns. But jury's out. So I think you can come to either conclusion. I think the engineering one is more fun of an answer. It's more of a fantasy answer. So it just seems more likely that's what George is doing. But okay, and another thing about wyverns that's interesting is the potential parallels. So they have the brindled wyvern that has jade green scales. And now on the show, they've given us Moondancer, who's a green dragon with the brindled pattern. So that's not emphasis. That could be just because they're related species, and so they have similar morphological characteristics, or it could be because they're crossbred. Similarly, the biggest wyverns are the black ones. They're called shadow wings. They're impossible to see. Drogon is the winged shadow, and he's impossible to see. And Balerion and Drogon are the biggest. Well, Balerion's older than his 2 other dragons, but Drogon is the same age as Viserion and Rhaegal, but grows faster and bigger, even before the other 2 are chained up. So I just like that parallel with the shadow wings and the black dragons being, the biggest. Because if you crossbred wyverns and fireworms, you might get some of the same special patterns that the wyverns have. I don't know. This is all fantasy science here. So now there is a question about whether or not Araya's worms and fireworms are the same thing. And let me put my fireworm art on the screen. Unless I forgot to grab it, but we can fix that one real quick. It's by Kevin Catalan also. Kevin Catalan has done all the weird beasts, actually. Here is a swamp wyvern. And here's his fireworm. Okay. Oh, I've got to get rid of Aegon here. Where did that layer load in? Oh, okay, sorry. Too many layers. So that's Kevin Catalan's fireworm there. Big nasty beastie that he is. Like that. See? Not a human face. Worm face. Dragony worm face. Sloped nose. Not... Yeah. Okay, so... Are the fireworms the same as Araya's worms? Oh, okay, this isn't updating. Hang on. There's the fireworm. There it is. All right, thank you. There's the fireworm. So, Kevin Catalan, again, nasty, nasty fireworm. Is it the same as Araya's worms? We don't know. The fireworms tunnel through molten rock and live in the rock. Araya's worms are parasites. Now, usually, parasites live in their hosts, and they're only going to leave their host in order to do their life cycle thing and reproduce. Those worms that grew out of Araya, though, they weren't living in there sustainably. They were just using her body as a temporary host, more like the aliens. So would those worms that hatched out of her, would they have crawled into the rock and started and become fireworms? I don't know. I mean, they had human hands and faces, and fireworms don't have those. But maybe that's because they combined with her DNA, and when fireworms breed, that doesn't happen. But I tend to think they're different, guys. I tend to think that not all worms are the same, and that like there are fireworms living in the rock. There should also be parasitic worms that are fire-based in Valyria. Like I said, they may have evolved to live in the Targaryen or in the Valyrians. Let's see. Tim. So yeah, I tend to think that Araya's worms are not fireworms, but they are hot. They are cooking her from the inside. They are creatures of fire. So they could be related also. But it makes sense that there would be those kinds of parasites lurking in Valyria. So I could go either way on that. Let's do some polls. I always forget about the polls. We'll test Maynard Plum. We'll see if 3 hours into the stream, he's still sitting by the computer. The poll question is... What was the poll question? Oh. Are Araya's worms the same as fireworms? He's not going to know how to spell Araya. I'm going to do this. Don't worry about it, Maynard Plum. I'll just do, are the worms the same? You know, I'm talking about Araya's worms and fireworms. Are they the same? And then I'll ask you who thinks they're frozen. I'm not frozen. Who thinks they're, skip reading, talking. Who thinks that they're engineered or not? Are the worms the same? Is close. Looks like no is slightly in favor. But that's pretty close. Yeah. 55-45. That could go either way. So you can see both ideas are plausible. I do this to Maynard James Plum every week. I'm like, all right, you're going to watch and then I'll say something and you'll do a poll. And then I forget for 2.5 hours. Just long enough for him to wander off and do something. And then I'm like, let's do a poll. So we got 91 votes. We got 800 people watching. So most people don't want to vote, but that's okay. You can vote if you want to. If you just pop open the live chat, you should be able to easily vote there. But yeah, it looks like it is close. And we've got, with 100 votes in, 54-46. That's been steady for a while. So we'll call that, and then we'll say, are dragons created or natural? Created. Natural. And natural doesn't mean they're not magical. We know they're magical, but do they just exist on their own? That's the question. That's the big one. This is what I'm curious to see. Probably come in favor of created, but I want to see how far. In Elden Ring, people who consume dragon hearts in Dragon Communion slowly transform into magma worms. Reminds me of Dany consuming a heart and giving birth to a dragon baby. Yeah, that is similar. So maybe you ingest the parasites on purpose. And like, you know, maybe the parasites that Araya got, like those are the out of control ones. The Valyrians would have been controlling and breeding those things and managing them. So those are ones that were just out in the wild that she got somehow. It just shows you that there are worms that can do DNA combining. So that may be how that is done. There's a lot of parallels to Elden Ring. Yes, there are. Especially if you know my theories, apparently. So it looks like we are 65-35, 64-36 for the dragons being created. That makes sense. What do you mean, are we taking them into consideration? The dragons in Asshai. Considering for what? So yeah, those are the fireworms. Well, we're going to consider the Asshai part right now. So I'm sure your question will be answered. But I'm just saying dragons as a species. And it looks like we have created. So, in Ancient Asshai, I'm going to change this artwork here. We go with Harkoon, the hero. Septon Barth speculates that the men from the Shadowlands of Asshai were the first to tame dragons, and that they showed the Valyrians how to do it before disappearing from history. This has led to a whole thing called the Great Empire of the Dawn. The Great Empire of the Dawn theory really solidified once we got the World of Ice and Fire, which had a lot of new clues, but I want to go through these clues as they came to us. So in Game of Thrones, the Septon Barth thing I have to lead with because that's kind of the frame. But in Game of Thrones, yes, Bran has a dream, his coma dream where he flies all around and sees everybody doing different stuff, One of the last things he sees, the last thing before the heart of winter, he looks to Asshai, and there are dragons stirring beneath the sunrise. This implies that dragons still live in Asshai, or once did, or came from there. Something like that. It's a vision. It may not be literal, but it gives this that association. Then Illyrio, he tells Dany that her eggs came from Asshai. They don't. They're from Westeros. The Alyssa farm and stole them. But the lie tells you what's believable. It's believable that dragon eggs could come from Asshai. So this is more proof that the dragon lore is tied to there. Then we have Quaithe talking about going to Asshai to learn things. Jorah wants to take her to Asshai. There's just a lot of stuff suggesting that she should go there. And George has said that he originally had planned for that, but then changed that. Yeah, Jenny of Oldstones, I think Valyria and Asshai are very similar as far as being magically polluted fallout zones. The Doom was 400 years ago. Asshai would have been destroyed in the Long Night thousands of years ago. So it is less toxic. People can go there, but it's still somewhat toxic. But yeah. So then Dany has this vision, right? The kingly ghost with the gemstone eyes. This artwork is by Atlantis Morissette. When we see this in the first book, we don't know who these people are. They are kingly ghosts. They're wearing the faded raiment of kings. Their eyes are opal, amethyst, tourmaline, and jade. And their hair is silver, gold, and platinum white. So they look like dragon lords, but with different color eyes. One of them has purple eyes. The others don't. And they are rooting for Dany to wake the dragon. They have swords of pale fire in their hands. So in the next book, we start hearing about Lightbringer and how it's associated with dragons. So we can see that these are people talking about dragons, holding flaming swords, and they look quasi-Valyrian, with one of them looking perfectly Valyrian with the purple eyes. So the first thought you have is these are obviously Dany's ancestors of some kind. They are ancient dragon lord ghosts or spirits. We would probably think that they are Valyrian, except for that we never hear about Valyrians having all these other color eyes. But we also have these clues that maybe the Valyrians came from Asshai. And so you can see what the picture is here. The Valyrians are one surviving tribe or race from Asshai. And that once upon a time, there were silver-haired people of other eye colors and probably skin colors. But the Valyrians alone survived, probably because they were away from Asshai when the disaster fell. Some of them had already started a colony on Valyria. Maybe that's where the Great Empire of the Dawn found or created dragons. And that's why the Valyrians are there. But for some reason, when the Long Night fell and Asshai was destroyed, Valyrians survived in Valyria. Or they fled the Great Empire of the Dawn and established Valyria. And so we are left, this vision gives us this picture. Like I said, the Valyrians are one surviving tribe among many, and the other ones were lost. Now later, we get the detail, right? In the world of Ice and Fire, we're told about this great empire of the dawn. It's this fabled lost empire that's like Atlantis, kinda, and it existed in the same place that Yi does now, but it was bigger. It encompassed more land than Yi, basically everything between the Bones Mountains and the Grey Waste, which might include Asshai, depending on how you read the map and the description. So we've got this mysterious Dawn Age pre-Yitish empire taking up all of far eastern Essos. And then we have Asshai, which is the biggest city in the world by a factor of 4. And it's all blighted and ruined now, but it probably wasn't once that way, because we can see that the whole peninsula has been messed up and blighted and ruined. And so large cities are usually built by large, prosperous civilizations. And so I put these together. There's some other clues, but basically the Great Empire of the Dawn just turns out to be the name of the ancient Asshai Dragon Lord civilization. Now, the Great Empire of the Dawn, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. There are some other clues that Asshai might be the original home for dragons, even before we get the Great Empire of the Dawn stuff, which is everything having to do with Azor Ahai. Because Azor Ahai's legend is from Asshai, and yet it's important to Westeros. Jesus. Okay. You're doing a pink out, girl. That's a total pink out. Hi, pretty. Are you having fun? You're having fun. Okay. So we're all sitting here trying to figure out, is Dany Azor Ahai reborn? Is Jon Azor Ahai reborn? Mel thinks it's Stannis. She's going to figure out it's Jon and Dany. These are all Westerosi people. This is a Westerosi story. Why do we care about an ancient prophecy from Asshai if it doesn't have something to do with the others? Well, it's easy to figure out. Flaming Sword Dragon hero might be the guy to beat the others, right? Jon and Dany are set up to fight the others. It's not hard to see that there must be a link between Asshai and Azor Ahai and Lightbringer and Westeros and the Long Night and the Sword of Dragonsteel that the last hero had. And Dawn, I think it's 1 in 20, not 1 in 8. But that's only 1/8 full. That's depopulated. It wasn't built for that population. It was built for a much larger population that doesn't exist anymore. It also has huge land walls, which means it was built at a time when there were lots of other people around that might come and try to invade, whereas nobody would invade Asshai now, the way it is. Grimace, Tim, you're cooking in that chat there, buddy. Oh, let's check on our poll. I completely forgot. 200 votes. Dragons are created. 64-35. 64-36. Okay, cool. So Azor Ahai is from Asshai. House Dane also is another one. They look like Valyrians, but they're not related to the Targaryens. They come from somewhere else. They have a unique story. They have a sword that's like Valyrian steel, but not. So everything about them is Valyrian, but not. That implies they could have a common ancestor with Valyria. People figured that out before The World of Ice and Fire came out and then showed us all this proof of dragon lords in Asshai. And so, yes, the Danes must have fled directly to Westeros from Asshai. I don't think I got... Oh, yes, I do have Dane artwork. Where is it? Come back, Danes. This will be Sir Arthur Dane by Mobo Bohm, which I have modified so that Dawn looks like Lightbringer. So a Damphir is a kind of vampire, Sistlin. And me and Tim hashed that out one day, that there could be some parallels to Damphir, but it looks more like he's using the Damphir idea other places and then just referencing the name. So yeah, the House Dane is a clue that there are dragon lords other than Valyria out there from the Dawn Age. And then there's also these cool legends of dragon slayers around Westeros, which are very hard to explain if dragons have never been to Westeros. So Davos Dragon Slayer is from the Reach. So is Serwyn of the Mirror Shield, and so is Galadon of Morn, and so is Florian of the Fool. Well, Galadon of Morn is from Tarth. That's the South, not the Reach. But the rest of those myths are all from the Reach. And Florian the Fool is only a maybe dragon slayer. It's based on the puppet show in the third Dunk and Egg book. In one scene, she is doing Florian the Fool, and in another, she is cleaning up a dragon and a dragon slayer. So that could be the same story, or it might be separate. Hard to say. But Serwyn of the Mirror Shield, Galadon of Morn, and Davos Dragon Slayer are all dragon slayers in Dawn Age Westeros. So why those stories exist? Maybe because some mean dragon lords came here a long time ago. And Galadon of Morn, in particular, all of the language around that is parallel to Dawn. Galadon of Morn versus Dawn, the Sword of the Morning. Okay. He only unsheathed it 3 times, the Just Made, which is the name of his sword, and Lightbringer 3 attempts to forge it. The Just Made was used to slay a dragon, which makes me wonder if Dawn isn't a dragon slayer sword as well. And I've gone into that elsewhere. I don't want to get too bogged down on that. But if the black swords kill the others and the ice demons, does the white sword kill the dragons? And it could make sense, because if you're the Great Empire of the Dawn, you might need a way to kill dragons in order to control them. And also, I think the Dragon Lord Bloodstone Emperor is essentially invading Westeros as a hostile person, whereas the Danes would be defending them. But check out my house, Dane Iceberg, for more on that. I don't want to make all my icebergs start to sound the same. So then we've got the Great Empire of the Dawn proper. Let me bring up that artwork. This is the 5 Forts by Henrique Carvalho. You guys have seen this before. 5 Forts, supposedly made out of fused stone. And this is, that was Martin H. Mathis. This is Henrique Carvalho. Sorry. Same idea, though. Here's the 5 Forts. Here's a close-up. So these are made out of fused stone, and they are said to have been built during the days of, I believe it was the Pearl Emperor, who was only the 2nd or 3rd of the Great Empire of the Dawn emperors. So long before the Long Night. And I think we can know that this is true because Yi-Ti arose right after the Long Night. So the legend goes that after the Long Night, the Great Empire of the Dawn did not reform. It was scattered to the winds. All the survivors went their own way, became hostile of each other, and soon after, Yi-Ti arises as the successor, the biggest empire, occupying most of the former territory of its predecessor. Also using the title God Emperor, like they did. Probably have a similar religion. The thing is, if Yi-Ti had built the 5 forts, they would claim them. Usually people tend to err on the side of claiming things they didn't do to make themselves look great. But if some of the original Yi-Tish emperors had built the 5 forts, they would claim them. But Yi-Ti doesn't. They say, no, it was the Great Empire of the Dawn who came before us that made the 5 forts. And the 5 forts are 1,000 feet tall, supposedly, and made out of fused dragonstone, fused stone. The same as the Valyrian roads, and the same as all the Valyrian citadels, like Dragonstone and Valyria and Volantis, the Black Walls, etc. And so, this means that the Great Empire of the Dawn was in fact dragon lords, and that matches with Dany's vision, where they all have silver hair and stuff, right? Do you think the Danes could ride dragons? Cheryl, it would have to be a dragon of the right lineage, and that lineage is so old, there's probably not a dragon of that lineage, so probably not. But it is interesting that Daenerys is a significant part Dane, and that the last 2 houses that were married into Targaryen before 2 generations of incest, and then Rhaegar and Dany, were Blackwood and Dane. And Blackwood carries Greenseer and Skinchanger magic, and the Danes might be original dragon lords from a shot. So Dany got an influx of both of those bloodlines before she was able to hatch dragons. Maybe that's a coincidence. I tend to think not. Is there a chance of fused stone wall under the wall? Yes, absolutely. In fact, I suspect that is the case, because the Great Empire of the Dawn would have established the beginnings of the wall, and that's what they tend to build in. So yes, I think it's fused stone under the ice. I'd almost be surprised if it wasn't. Okay, I need to put Cleo back in the room. Let me play some. Do you want the music or the Hightower video again? That's your choice. Vote quickly. Yell things in the chat. And I'll respond. Music. You guys like my music? Cool. And we're back. I have new music coming. I just didn't set it up. I might have some, by after the season, certainly. We don't play music during the post-game shows for House of the Dragon because that stuff is moving way too fast. And yes, of course, Grey Waste Tim and Girl Nettles will be back for House of the Dragon coverage. So remember to join us every Sunday for that. And then, of course, if you sign up for our Patreon or for the channel member squisher, which you do with the join button below next to the subscribe button, you will get access to our Discord, which is the safe and non-toxic place to discuss all this crap that doesn't look like Twitter or Reddit or Tumblr or any of those places. So we have a lot of fun. We've got hundreds of people in there. If you are a longtime fan of the program and are tight on money, just message me on social media. I'll give you a Discord invite. It's not meant to be overly gatekeepy. Just keep the conversation on the up and up with people that are all meaning to discuss the show in good faith. It's okay if we disagree, but if we assume each other is trying to make a point, not just trying to own each other, then it doesn't turn into, Twitter. So I do need to post a new Discord link. I will do that as soon as the stream is over. But yes, if you click the join button, just click on the membership tab. It's the tab that says community, actually, and that will have all the member posts, and that's where the invite will be. So, Great Empire of the Dawn, it's Battle Isle time. No, we talked about the 5 forts. So, comparing the empires real quick, I did want to say this as far as the, Valyria and the Great Empire of the Dawn. The Great Empire of the Dawn, it's painted as this great, perfect thing, but it is even said in legend that it grew corrupt over time, and by the time the Bloodstone Emperor comes around and usurps Amethyst Empress, he is practicing necromancy and torture and dark arts and every foul thing. So he probably didn't invent all of that. And if the Great Empire of the Dawn had dragons way back when to make the 5 forts, then maybe they did the icky blood magic to create the dragon bond or to engineer wyverns and stuff. In fact, the Valyrians, they could be a tribe of people from the Great Empire of the Dawn who survived. Maybe the Great Empire of the Dawn people created the Valyrians
to be able to control the dragons. And maybe the Valyrians, somebody even suggested, were not even the most powerful people. Maybe they were slaves, essentially, who were created to pilot the dragons, but then, overthrew their masters or something like that. I tend to think probably not, but it is definitely possible that that the Valyrians were created by the Great Empire of the Dawn. Absolutely. Now, let me talk about fused stone. Because, we made some. So, this is, again, the High Tower. That's further away. This is a good piece of hard evidence. So, the High Tower of Old Town is built upon the Battle Isle Fortress. The Battle Isle Fortress is made out of fused stone. And even the first versions of the High Tower, which was just a wood and timber tower, were built on top of this thing. So we know this is the oldest thing here, and it's made out of fused black dragonstone. And so fused black dragonstone can only be made by dragon lords with dragonfire and sorcery, and that means the dragon lords came to Battle Isle, where Old Town eventually would, grow up as a city, and built this fortress on this rock. And it is made of fused stone. However, it is of a plain, unadorned style. So it doesn't have all the ornamentation of the Valyrians. It's the same technique, but a different style of construction. They compare it to the roads, which are flat and unadorned, and also the walls of Atlantis, which are presumably flat and wall-like. So that's what this fortress looks like. And it is proof that dragon lords came here in the Dawn Age, because the first high towers are well before the Long Night. They are here potentially before other first men. There are seafarers and traders coming to Whispering Sound potentially before first men even come over the Arm of Dorne. So we're talking way before the Long Night, people on Battle Isle, dragon lords creating this fortress. They can only be the same people from Ashai that built the fused stone 5 forts. And so that is Great Empire of the Dawn theory. And the important thing is this gives us the connection that Azor Ahai needs between all this Ashai stuff and Westeros. Like I said, Jon and Dany are potentially fulfilling this Ashai prophecy. Why does it matter? Oh, it looks like the original Ashai Dragon Lords came to Westeros. I wonder if they had anything to do with the others and causing the Long Night and all that crap. Oh, yes. They do have legends about causing the Long Night and about monsters invading afterwards. So yeah, this is beginning to give us a tangible, hard evidence to a narrative link that we were looking for already, which is Ashai and dragon things coming to Westeros in the Dawn Age. And then, the Danes make a lot more sense, right? No, I did not, Narala. Thank you for asking. Did I get access to the first 2 episodes of House of the Dragon? No, I did not. Last time, they invited me to the premiere. They thought I was a very important YouTuber, and I was not expecting it, but they just out of nowhere invited me to the premiere. And this year, they're just like, you know what? We got a lot of requests, and I'm sorry, but it's actually kind of good, because what it means is that I will be watching the show with you guys, and my reaction and Tim and Nettles' reactions after the show. Thank you. I feel important. Thank you. It's okay. I'm obviously just kidding here, or playing this up. They didn't send it to me, and we did ask. That part is true. But this way, I can react live, and you guys know that my reaction on the post-game show will be authentic. It'll be a real reaction video and not something that I watched a couple weeks ago and I'm trying to gin up my whatever I thought about it again. So, no, not on that. I don't think Glidus got him either, Grey Waste Tim. I saw Glidus commenting on someone else's post who had seen them as if he had not seen them. So I do not know, even though George mentioned Glidus in his blog post. I'm jealous of that. That's okay. Couldn't happen to a better guy. Glimbus. Old Swifty. They'll talk to me one day. Anyway. So, where were we? House of the Dragon. Yeah, okay, no. Dragon Lore Iceberg, Bloodstone Emperor, Battle Isle. So the Bloodstone Emperor he seems to be the Proto-Valyrian, meaning he is showing the way for the darkness of Valyria. The Valyrians seem to be emulating him in a way. He practices dark arts and slavery, as do the Valyrians. He cast down the true gods. The Valyrians don't worship gods other than the dragons, I think. So themselves. And the main thing is that the Bloodstone Emperor probably is Azor Ahai, and he probably is a Dragon Lord. And then Azor Ahai, he forges a magic sword by murdering with blood magic, right? He murders Nissa Nissa and tempers his sword in her heart blood, and that creates this magic sword. What are the Valyrians doing? They're creating Valyrian steel with blood magic. They're using human sacrifice. So it's almost like they looked at the Azor Ahai myth and they were like, this is a recipe for making magic swords. And so we've got this guy here. This is the Bloodstone Emperor for all intents and purposes. This art is from a game called Lineage 2. But me and other people have been using it as the Bloodstone Emperor for so long that he just is the blood. I mean, it's perfect. It's quasi-Asian looking, which, all of this Yi-Ti, Great Empire of the Dawn stuff, heavily inspired by, as we've talked about, Amaterasu and some other specific mythology, as well as just the general culture and the physical descriptions. So, yeah, this is a perfect Bloodstone Emperor. It's got black hands and spirit chains. I mean, it's great. But I guess this stuff is really tropey. All these archetypes and tropes are kind of similar. So the Bloodstone Emperor, he may have been the one who invaded Westeros with dragons, which is a thing that we think happened. Battle Isle's named after some great battle. The thing I have put together is like Hightowers and Danes standing against the invaders. So they're kind of like the American colonists, the British colonists who became Americans and turned against Britain. That would be like how I see the Hightowers and Danes. I don't want to repeat myself too much, but that is, I think, what's going on. So there were dragons in Westeros, but not for very long. That's the point, is that they came here, they mixed it up with the others, they had something to do with the Long Night and Azor Ahai, but they didn't leave a lasting presence. And so there's just a couple of legends of them, and that's about it. Also, the Winged Knight supposedly flew on the back of a falcon. But the maesters are like, oh, well, maybe that's a dragon rider glimpsed at a distance or something. But, yeah, I don't know. Could be. There could also be magical condors and birds that maybe you can ride on top of. They'd have to be bigger than anything we have. But maybe the Winged Knight was small. He's half child of the forest. He's a hybrid. So he's a little short dude on a giant condor. Condor falcon. A glass candles. Yeah, that's what we got to talk about. So I mentioned earlier glass candles, but I'm saving some glass candle stuff. I get the art everywhere. I really do go and search high and low for it. So, Battle Isle. No, glass candles. Okay. So the Bloodstone Emperor, who is the last ruler of the Great Empire of the Dawn, and possibly also Azor Ahai, or at least connected to him, is remembered as the person who founded the Cult of Starry Wisdom, or Church of Starry Wisdom. It can be called either. And they are still active to this day in port cities around the world. And they're popular with sailors, because sailors like astronomy and astrology-based religion, because they had to use astronomy out on the open seas. This is true in the real world. George is copying it here. And so port cities, they have Starry Wisdom temples. Marwyn is said to sacrifice at strange little sailors' temples down by the docks. Those are probably Starry Wisdom temples. Now, Quaithe is the most obvious Starry Wisdom cultist, and she is definitely using a glass candle. And Marwyn is using one too, and I believe is a cultist. So it seems like glass candles
Ashai, and Starry Wisdom cult are all sort of connected. Even though glass candles obviously are a Valyrian magic. It's a fire magic, though. And as we said, the Rhoynish are strong in Ashai and Valyria, or in the Valyrian former cities like Atlantis. You know, Mel is a shadowbinder and a red priestess. So presumably the way that happens is the red priests in Ashai, they're doing like transfer programs, right? With the shadowbinders studying. I mean, she didn't study with the shadowbinders on her own. It would have been her superiors that had her do that. So check out the Melisandre Secrets series. But the point about glass candles that I want to bring up, and I think this is Northern Tommy. Was it you that went and got some of this from the drafts, the copies of his drafts, the drafts for some of like Feast? I think it's Feast for Crows. But essentially, the George used in some of the early drafts of Feast, he was doing something with glass candles that is a little more elaborate. He was having it so that every maester kept a glass candle in their chamber. And so there would be a lot more of them. And they were going to start burning again near the beginning of the story. And that was going to be this big thing, that the glass candles were burning again everywhere in the maesters' chambers. That was changed to their burning again in the house of Erython Nightwalker, who was probably Euron and Karth. But the big thing is that it was spelled out by Crescent in his prologue that the Valyrian sorcerers could bind their spirits to the candles. And that if until the candle was extinguished, the sorcerer couldn't be killed. So it's kind of like a Horcrux or a soul jar. It's again a fantasy trope way before Harry Potter. The idea that the wizard, the dark wizard, his soul is tied to some magical artifact in a cave somewhere, and until you find that thing, you can't actually kill him. So the glass candles originally worked that way in George's mind, and he told us that. Well, I suspect that it still does work that way. That sorcerers can tie their spirits to the candles, and that is how the Great Empire of the Dawn ghosts are still able to communicate with Dany. Because otherwise, where are they? Where are they talking to Dany from? Quaithe hasn't even made contact with Dany at this point. Maybe she's sending this whole vision to Dany. But I tend to think those gemstone-eyed kingly ghosts are spirits that exist somewhere that are sending Dany a message. They may or may not be. But if they are, then where are they? I don't think they're in the Weirwood net, right? Like that doesn't really make sense. So where are they? Are they in the fire? Well, if their spirits are somehow tied to like glass candles in a Ashai or something, that would be a cool way that they're still around to be contacted. Either by, Dany directly or with Quaithe's help. So that may be a thing. So let's light those candles, see if we can see anything. Yeah. And we were talking about Euron potentially having like an oily black stone under his eye patch. But what if it was dragonglass, like Moore's crow food, and that he can use it as a glass candle? He keeps his patch over it so people can't spy. So that's what somebody was saying. Thank you, Northern Tommy. So, yeah, that's pretty cool. So just keep your eye on the glass candles. They might have more to them than we have seen. There could be a way for them to store soul information or preserve people's lives. So that's a pretty cool little new thing that I learned. And the most important thing is that Dany's going to visit Ashai with the candles. Heavily foreshadowed. You know, George has said he was going to have her go there, but then he ran out of just too much, it would take too much time. But Quaithe keeps telling her that there's this truth in Ashai waiting for her. No doubt having to do with Azor Ahai and dragons and a lot of the shit that we've been talking about. So she could use a glass candle to learn that information without going there. And Marwyn the Mage has access to all the candles of the Citadel. And he's one of the only people that cares about him because he's the Archmaester of Magic, Higher Mysteries. And the other maesters poo-poo magic. So those candles are just locked up in a case somewhere. So I would think that Marwyn threw one in a travel case and brought one with him so that he can communicate with his cronies back at Old Town and with Sam and with other people once they're halfway across the world. So once Dany has a candle, then she'll be able to communicate with Quaithe and learn the truths of Ashai that she needs to learn. And that will save time and travelogue. So I've got a video called Glass Candle Sorceress. It talks about that. So that's the pre-Valyrian lore. I have a few more things to say about, oh, that's right, House Targaryen. So we've already covered a lot of the nature of dragons. However, there are some specific things about the Targaryens that I have saved. That is Battle Isle, Five Forts, Arthur Dane, Harkoon. So this is Mike Hallstein, and then I photoshopped Dragonbinder into the picture. But this is Victarion and Mokoro with Dragonbinder. We'll come back to Dragonbinder. We talked about that earlier. Here's some Dragonstone. That's what I want. So we talked about the Doom, and we talked about how the Targaryens didn't bring a lot of the icky Valyrian stuff, the blood magic and the slavery. These are your three conquerors arriving on Dragonstone. It's by Chase Stone. There's Balerion. I particularly like Balerion here. Big dinosaur foot. And then on the left is Aransta Sesteo, and that is Maester Crescent at the beginning of Clash, looking out with the gargoyles. So there's cool. Looks like a wyvern and a hellhound, or just a gargoyle. But the one on the left has wings. So they brought 5 dragons, as we know, including Balerion. Meraxes and Vhagar hatched on Dragonstone. So there's other 4 dragons. I'm not sure what happened to them. And in fact, it's kind of a weird math equation to bring 5, and then 100 years later, there's only 3. Only one of those 5. So 4 of them died. Was that old age? Or was that... was there a little internecine fighting? Was there some Targaryen fighting on Dragonstone that killed the dragons? We don't know. George can write that history if he wants to, but there's no clues. And as I mentioned, the Targaryens do not use horns. So is that a more natural kind of dragon bond? Or is it just what I'm saying, that the horns are only used to create the bond, not to control the dragons? And the Valyrians bonded with dragons the same way as the Targs did. But it could be either way. With the whole incest to monopolize the family dragons, another reason why that makes sense is because George is mimicking medieval incest. And medieval incest is essentially done to monopolize wealth within a family, which is a form of power. So if the Targaryens are maintaining family control of their lines of dragons, that's like a better parallel to what he's really talking about there. So yeah, Dragonbinder could be the way that these lines were created. And so now the Targaryens, they just have these dragons, but they're all connected to their family. And I do suspect that they could have glass candles on Dragonstone. I definitely suspect that. Particularly with the Dornish letter, you know, that weird thing where Rhaenys has been taken in Dorne. Maybe she's dead, maybe she's not. Aegon gets that letter from the Dornish, and he crumples it in his hand, and his hand bleeds. And then he goes back to Dragonstone and comes back the next day and then signs a peace treaty. So what did he have to do on Dragonstone? Was it something that verified information in the letter? I think he went back to Dragonstone to use his glass candle in order to collect information. At least that's my theory. So I do think they might have candles on Dragonstone. Wouldn't be surprised if Stannis or Dany or somebody turns one up. So, dragon fights, guys, are insane. Just like my bird, who's going to have to wait. I'm done. Done with it. But dragon fights, guys, they are insane. And this is something we learn from the Dance of the Dragons Targaryen days. So without going into any specific detail about any of the fights, I have some general observations. Like we said, dragons grow forever, but they slow down. So the younger ones grow fast, and then they slow down. We know the dragon scales get harder, and their fires hotter. So it'd be harder for one dragon to rake open the belly of another dragon if the dragon is older and bigger. But it's really only the very oldest that would be impervious to that. The fires get hotter also. And it's only the bigger ones that can melt stone. That's why I was saying the road crew dragon's got to be big. So the eyes, wings, and neck are the vulnerable spots, right? The neck just because it's skinny, the eyes because they're not armored, and the wings because they're more delicate. And if they're flying and you damage the wing, then they will fall out of the sky and potentially die that way. So, although I don't think we hear of any dragons dying from falls, to be honest. There's a few that do, but they continue to fight on the ground. So, that might be hard. Well, falling on the ground is hard, but hard to break a dragon's bones, which have, you know, the high iron content and stuff. So we talked about controlling dragons. Now, Dany, if you remember, she's using a whip on Drogon, and she observes that the dragon goes towards the whip, whereas a horse goes away. So if you want to turn right on the horse, you whip left, and then it turns away from the whip. But dragons, they turn towards a threat. And like I said, they never disengage once they start fighting. So they're kind of like those aggressive little dogs that fight much bigger dogs. Or like Goose, my bird, who wants to take on bigger birds. Like, the dragons know no fear. And they just attack. And once they attack, they never quit. It doesn't matter the size. So, for example, Arrax attacking Vhagar was predictable. If you put two dragons close by like that and the riders have tension, the dragons will fight and you will not be able to keep them apart. So they don't disengage. The smaller ones do try to use agility, and this is the dance, where the dancing comes in. Agile movements, Moondancer versus Sunfyre, Tessarian on the field. That's the advantage the smaller ones have. They will try to come around and get the other dragon from behind and get him in the vulnerable spots. Now, there's a couple of interesting dragon strategies that we see during the conquest that I wanted to mention. So, and this is similar to what we see with the dance, just like how dragons are used in war. With Harrenhal, we see that dragons can be used to break sieges, right? Like, oh, you've locked yourself inside the castle. Well, that's great. Dragons fly. We just flew over, and then we breathed fire in all the windows and just burned everyone. You can even melt the castle, but that wasn't even necessary. That was just style points. So they can break sieges. At the Field of Fire, we saw that they trump cavalry and infantry, and that you shouldn't fight in a field of fire. Where's that art? Oh, I bet it's in Dragons. Thank you very much, Archerize It. Oh, there it is. Yeah, totally. Field of Fire, Renee Agner on the left, and on the right is Paul Ewell. So, yes, cavalry, infantry, not good matches for dragons. You know, at the dragon pit, the dragons are chained and enclosed and overwhelmed by crowds, and that happens. But these infantry, no. They just got burned up. And the way that Aegon did it is interesting. They got downwind and they spread out and they set fires around and sort of trapped them in the fire so that as the fire spread, they had nowhere to go. So they burned a lot of people at the Field of Fire. And then at the Eyrie, Visenya just flew up to the top of the Eyrie, landed in the courtyard, and put the king in check, essentially. She took Ronald Arryn and put him on her knee. And by the time his mom came out to see that the dragon had landed, she's sitting there with the Prince of the Vale going, "Hi, would you like to surrender? I think you would." And so she took the Vale without a fight. So this is another way that dragons can be used. They can surmount physical obstacles. And they can be used to gain an easy submission without even a fight. If you can, again, put the king or the queen in check, so to speak. So you could see that with like Fagon, for example. And then the Dornish, we already mentioned, they picked up their insurgency tactics, no doubt, from the Rhoynish. Being that the Dornish are Rhoynish. And that was only 700 years ago. They still retain a lot of Rhoynish culture. They would have had stories about how they fought the dragons. So they would have known, yeah, you don't meet them on a field with infantry. And what did the Dornish do? They abandoned their castles. They hid in caves. And they just wasted their time. They just wore them out and waited them out. And that they could never conquer them with dragons. It wasn't until the dragons died out and they did some marriage alliances that they brought Dorne into the Seven Kingdoms. So, let's see. Another thing I want to talk about here that has to do with dragons is Aegon's prophecy. Now, we talk about that a lot on this channel, so I don't want to belabor the point, as we say. But this is Urtach Altanaz, Aegon's dream. And below that is one that I cobbled together from two different pictures. It's Aransta Sesteo with the others, and Bastien Lecouf d'Armes with Aegon on the throne. So, the things that I want to say about this is that Aegon's prophecy is not original. It is a commentary on older prophecy. The prince that was promised is thousands of years old. And Melisandre and Maester Aemon both speak about it as if it is interchangeable with the prophecy of Azor Ahai's rebirth, which comes from Ashai. The Valyrians maintain the prince that was promised prophecy, and Valyrians have always had dragon dreams. That is just more proof that they are descended from the original Ashai dragon lords. So these prophecies have been handed down all the way from Ashai through Valyria. So when Aegon had his dream about the prince that was promised, they would have already known who that was. So the dream was that you guys need to conquer Westeros, and that's where this is all going to happen. That's where the threat from the north is coming. That's why we need the prince that was promised, and he's going to come from your line. So it basically was just clarifying that older prophecy. Now, in Dunk and Egg, we get a really interesting glimpse into how the Targaryens caretook this prophecy and how they spoke about it. So his brother, Daeron the Drunkard, has dragon dreams. And he knows that his uncle, King Aerys, has read about the return of dragons in scrolls, and that Daeron has dreamed about it. So basically, him and his uncles, all these uncles and cousins, all the royal Targaryens, are workshopping together what they dream, what they read in scrolls. 9-year-old Egg knows about all of it. Okay? So this is not just a secret that the king passes on to the heir, but rather something that all the Targaryens kind of talk about. So we think about Rhaegar and Maester Aemon and Bloodraven, but, you know, they were probably all communicating about this stuff too together. We know Aemon and Rhaegar were. So that's the picture that we get, is that the Targaryens have been caretaking the throne because of Aegon's prophecy, and they've been talking about all this stuff since then. Because it's like, well, Aegon's prophecy says we need dragons. Now we don't have dragons. What do we do? Was there a prophecy about that? Oh, I had a dream about them coming back. Well, we better work on this. And that, of course, leads to Summerhall. You know, an attempt to bring the dragons back. So this Aegon's prophecy, it's a thread that runs through all the Stark and Targaryen interactions. Like I said in the Jason Cregan video, Torrhen may have been told about it when he submitted to Aegon. Cregan and Jace probably talked about it when they made the Pact of Ice and Fire. Lyanna and Rhaegar almost certainly talked about it, you know, talking about the need to birth the prince that was promised and how the signs pointed to them. And then, of course, Jon and Dany will have a Stark-Targ partnership based on that prophecy too. And the whole idea with this is that we are serving a higher purpose. We're not just using the dragons to be powerful, rich kings. We are creating this monopoly and hopefully keeping a peaceful realm until the long night comes, so that we're in a position to fight for the side of humanity. And Dany is wrestling with this. So, yeah, that's kind of the theme of this power that the Targaryens have. And it's also, like I said, the thought experiment of like, well, what would you do, right? And I talked about how Aenar Targaryen or other Valyrians born into this legacy of power, of dragon power and stuff, it's kind of immoral. So like, what do you do with it? Well, the Targaryens have been wrestling with that question the whole time. Yeah, what's the basketball game score? Somebody tell me. So egg dreams, dragon egg dreams. Let me pull up some dragon egg art here. Cleo can suck it. Where's my dragon egg? Where are my dragons? She thinks she can control me with that. And we need to update. There we go. So, like I said earlier, Dany's dragon dreams seem to come from her egg, right? She dreams of a big black dragon slick with her own blood as if she's given birth to it. And then she has a black dragon that is Drogon. She gives birth to it. So she's getting the dragon dreams from Drogon's spirit inside the egg before it happens. That's why we put the eggs in the cradle, is because the dragon spirit's already alive and can bond with the people. Those little Targaryen babies in the cradle are probably having dragon dreams. They're probably seeing their unborn dragon in the egg in their dreams before it hatches, just like Dany did. So this made me start to wonder if all dragons' eggs, or if all dragon dreams actually come from eggs, because all the Valyrians had dragon eggs, and all the Targaryens do, even after the dragons are dead. John the Fiddler dreamed of a dragon hatching at White Walls. There was a dragon's egg at White Walls. Of course, there wasn't a real dragon. It was Egg throwing off his secret identity and announcing that he was a Targaryen. So I developed a theory that maybe Jon's recurring dream is actually a dragon dream, and that when he finally finishes it at the end of the crypts, he'll see a dragon. Because in the real crypt, there is a dragon's egg down there on the lowest level which is sending him the dreams. And I made a whole video about this, so I'm just quickly summarizing it. But yes, I have a theory about this. And also John parallels John the Fiddler, same name. John the Fiddler, Targaryen in disguise. And his dragon dream turned out to be about Egg, another Targaryen in disguise, announcing he's a Targaryen. So if John's dragon dream is a part of him realizing that he's a Targaryen, that would be a really strong parallel. So check out that video. But I did want to refer to that because it is a dragon lore theory. It's just a new one that I've talked about recently. And the last thing I will have to say is about Summerhall and dragon bomb theory. We know why Egg tried to hatch the eggs, because it was important. The Targaryens need the eggs. We know that he tried to use wildfire to do that, and before that, he consulted with the 9 mages from Essos. So he's really trying to get these eggs back. Or rather, trying to hatch the eggs to get the dragons back. The maesters talk about it as like, oh, he wanted the dragons to do political reforms, maybe. But I think he believed in the prophecy too. So now the dragon bomb theory is simply that dragon eggs are explosive, which isn't hard to believe. They're full of dragon potential and magic and life. Those things can pay for magical results. And Summerhall was an incredible conflagration. And maybe it was just because of wildfire, but maybe the eggs are explosive as well. And so it makes you think about the Doom differently, because there would be dragon's eggs all through the Valyrian Peninsula. So this is another way that the Faceless Men could have helped set off the Doom. Maybe they exploded the eggs and that set off the chain reaction. Or maybe the eruptions were worse because they're dragon's eggs all through, the mountains that exploded. And some people have even tied this to Hardhome, because Hardhome is a mysterious explosion that was so big they could see it from the wall, and the forest burned for a couple days. And Hardhome could be geothermically active. It could be that those are lava tubes or gas tubes. There's leaking natural gas that caught on fire down there. Maybe there's worms. There's also a maester that goes to Hardhome, leaves, and comes back. So what did he do in the meantime? Were the Faceless Men doing a test run for the Doom? Because Hardhome's 200 years before the Doom. I'm going to do a Hardhome video, so I don't want to go into that too deeply. I am curious what you guys think about Hardhome, though, if you want to tell me in the chat. And with that, I think I'm pretty much done here. If you guys have questions, I'll answer them. But yeah, that's pretty much everything. Could Hardhome be a Tunguska-like moon meteor? Well, but it burned for like a couple days. I think it's more than that. I think it's a geothermal activity. Let's see here. Is it possible that the need for there to be always a Stark at Winterfell is related to Aegon's prophecy? Yes. And or that Cregan is aware of the prophecy before Jace arrives at Winterfell? Yes. Yes. It may have survived all the way down to Rickard. And it may have died with Rickard and Brandon. And Ned didn't know about it until Lyanna told him about it. Or maybe Ned's just a skeptic. All those things are possible. But even if, the thing is, the Starks know about the others. So if any Targaryen tells the Stark about the prophecy, it's instantly credible, because how would the Targs shouldn't really know about the others. But if they do, it's like, oh, well, you must, you must know something. No, the cannibal is not Orion's dragon. That was too long ago. So, let me check one other thing. Okay, we've got, let's see here. Oh, this is from, oh, never mind. This is a different PayPal thing. That is not a question. What is going on? Sorry, this is totally unrelated to what we're doing here. Okay. All right, guys. Yeah. What was I saying? Final questions. That's what I was saying. Love the idea of cannibal being a culling dragon for dragon overpopulation. No, that was not my idea. He does eat the other dragons. I was wondering if maybe that was a non-Targaryen lineage dragon. Do purple eyes mean descendants of Amethyst Empress Nissa? That's how I take it. Only the mods can share links in the chat. You just found a picture of the nebula in Orion that looks like a dragon breathing fire. Yeah, I've seen that one. Cool. Well, I am definitely exhausted and my birds are waiting for me. So I'm going to go ahead and bounce. Thank you all for tuning in. But like I said, I will see you next Sunday. I'm probably going to do something in between now and next week. I don't know if it'll be a Renegade live stream with some hot D predictions and hot takes or a little short video, but make sure you're subscribed. And I will see you next Sunday and maybe sooner.